Hi, welcome to the Wolf Recap channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video. Our series begins with Scott, who hears a noise outside his room, and when he goes out to the balcony, he discovers that his friend, Stiles, had to climb the wall because Scott didn't answer his phone. Stiles tells him that his dad left the house and is asking for all the officers in the city because they found half a body in the woods. Stiles says they have to go to the woods and find the officers everywhere and try to escape from them. However, Stiles' father, Deputy Noah, catches him and asks where his partner in crime is. Scott tries to run away, but he is finally caught by Deputy Noah, who wants to know where Scott's partner is. Stiles tells him that he went to bed early because he has an important training in the morning, and then he takes his son and tells him to go to his car and they will talk about what he did later. Scott continues his journey in the woods alone, and suddenly a group of deer runs towards him at full speed, causing him to fall to the ground and lose his asthma inhaler. He then finds the other half of the body in front of him and is shocked. When he gets up, he hears a strange noise behind him and sees a werewolf attacking him. Scott tries to run away but eventually gets bitten. The next day, he discovers that he has become a werewolf and tries to hide his transformation from others. When he goes to school, he meets Stiles and shows him the bite mark, but Stiles doesn't believe him when he says that a werewolf did it. Later, Scott hears a ringing sound that nobody else can hear, and he realizes that the phone is outside the school. He listens to a conversation between two girls and discovers that the phone belongs to the new girl in class named Allison. When Scott and his friends go to play a popular game in the city called lacrosse, the coach makes Scott stand as a goalie, but he fails to catch the ball and falls down. Everyone, including the coach and his friends, are surprised by his strange behavior. After the game, Scott and Stiles go to find the other half of the body and Scott's inhaler. Scott tells Stiles that he's been hearing things and smelling things he couldn't before, but Stiles thinks he's crazy. They are interrupted by a guy named Derek, who tells them to leave because it's private property. Derek apologizes to Scott and tells him that his family died in a fire 10 years ago. He was traveling, and upon his return, he went to his job at the animal clinic. When he removed the bandage from the wound, he didn't find it, and he was surprised by what happened. He then went to feed the cats, and as soon as he entered the room, the cats started making strange noises and movements, scaring him. He quickly left the room and found Allison knocking on his door, crying and saying that she accidentally hit a dog. Scott tried to calm her down and went with her to retrieve the dog from her car. When they opened the trunk, the dog started growling at them, and suddenly Scott's eyes turned yellow, frightening the dog, which refused to come out. They took the dog and left. Later, Scott asked Allison out to a party, and she agreed. The next morning, Scott went to school and was confronted by Jackson, who accused him of stealing something and demanded to know where he got it. Scott denied the accusation, but Jackson grabbed him and said he knew Scott was hiding something and that he would find out. They went to practice, where the coach split them into two teams. Scott played exceptionally well and impressed everyone. Later, Scott's friend, Stiles, suspected that he was a werewolf because of his sudden changes in behavior. Stiles warned Scott that he would change when the full moon rose and that his desire for blood and killing would increase. Scott approached him and said, "Stiles, I think the joke we made in the forest turned out to be real. You look like a werewolf." But Scott didn't believe him and said, "I have a date with Allison Argent, and I'm not available." However, Stiles told him that the full moon was tonight, and his appearance would change, and his desire for blood and killing would increase. He insisted that Scott cancel his date with Allison and take his mobile phone. Scott tried to hit him but managed to control himself and let him go. He went to Allison's house, and they went to the party together, laughing and dancing. Suddenly, his heart started beating faster, and he felt sick. He apologized to Allison and left. She tried to catch up with him, but she couldn't. Derek, a friend of Scott's, met her and told her that he would take Scott home. When they arrived at Scott's house, took a shower and noticed that his nails had grown, and he had fangs. He went to his friend Stiles, but he refused to let him in and told him that he suspected Derek of killing the girl in the forest and biting Scott. Stiles told him that he saw Derek taking Allison home after the party, so Scott quickly left and went to Allison's house. In the forest, he found Derek and asked him where Allison was. Derek replied that she was safe as long as Scott stayed away from her. Derek attacked him, but they heard a noise, and Derek told Scott to run. Suddenly, hunters led by Chris appeared and shot an arrow that hit Scott's arm. Derek fought the hunters and saved Scott, and they realized that the hunters were after their kind. Derek told Scott that he needed to control his abilities and that he was better than any human. They went to Stiles, who helped Scott return home safely. The next day, Scott apologized to Allison again, but when she saw her father, Chris, she was shocked. He was the hunter who wanted to kill him. Scott leaves to change his clothes and tells Stiles that he saw Allison's father, who wanted to kill him. Scott is in shock from the sudden events, and Stiles reassures him that he probably didn't know that Scott was being trained. Jackson then attacks Scott and knocks him to the ground, causing Scott to become enraged and his eyes turn yellow. He charges at Jackson, but Stiles is able to calm him down and take him to the bedroom before he transforms. Later, Scott attacks Stiles, but Stiles is able to hit him with a fire extinguisher and calm him down. Stiles tells Scott that he needs to control his anger and heart rate because they are what cause him to transform. When it becomes nighttime, Stiles calls Scott and tells him that Jackson dislocated his shoulder and that Scott will play with him on Saturday to support him. Suddenly, Derek is in Scott's room and tells him that he saw him at the field and that he will transform in front of everyone. If they find out he transformed, they will expose the cover-up, not just the hunters who are after them, but everyone. Derek threatens to kill him himself. Scott goes to apologize to the coach, but the coach doesn't accept his apologies and tells him that he will play. Later, Stiles goes to Derek's house and tells him that he needs to play, but Derek tells him that he will transform in front of his mother and everyone will see it. Suddenly, Stiles sees a flower named wolfsbane and goes to pick it up. The flower is wrapped in rope and he starts pulling it out of the ground. Suddenly, the body turns into a girl's body and they realize that she was a werewolf like Scott. The next morning, Scott reports Derek to the police and they arrest him. The promised night arrives, and the game begins. The players don't pass the ball to Scott and keep tackling him. Jackson enters and tells the players not to pass the ball to Scott, but to listen to him as he is the team leader. Scott becomes enraged and his eyes turn yellow again when he hears this. He becomes even more enraged when he sees Allison holding a Jackson #1 banner. And the game changes, and Scott remains with the ball and manages to dodge all the players. He even hits the goalie's stick so hard that it breaks the net. Scott manages to win the game for his team. After the match, he runs quickly to the school bathroom as his claws have grown long, and there he manages to control himself. Allison enters and tells him that he played really well today, and Scott thanks her. Later, Stiles tells him that the coroner said that the girl was killed by an animal, not a human. Unfortunately, Derek was released from custody and the girl who died was named Laura, Derek's sister. Moving on to Scott, he dreams of killing Allison on their school bus. The next day, he tells his friend Stiles that he feels like the dream was real. When they go outside, they see that the police are present and there is a bus with blood on it, just like in his dream. Stiles tells him that he really did it, and Scott keeps calling and texting Allison, but she doesn't respond. He searches for her among the students, and when he can't find her, he loses his temper and his eyes turn yellow. He hits the student's locker and breaks it, but suddenly Allison appears and he is relieved to see her. She tells him that she's okay, and he finds the locker that belongs to Jackson, her boyfriend, which he had broken. When they enter the classroom, they discover that the bus driver, named Harris, was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. It turns out that he was the one who was attacked. Later, Scott and Stiles go to the cafeteria for lunch, and Lydia, Jackson, and Cam all sit next to them. Allison comes in later and sits with them. Lydia tells Jackson that she wants to go out and convinces Scott and Allison to go bowling with them after school. After school, Scott goes to his job at the animal clinic, and Noah, Stiles' father, comes in with his dog to have his stitches removed. Noah tells the doctor about what happened at the school and shows him pictures of the bite marks. He tells Scott they found wolf hair at the scene. After leaving the clinic, Scott goes to his mother Melissa, who works as a nurse at the hospital, to bring her dinner. While there, he remembers Harris and becomes afraid without anyone seeing him in her room. He calls out to him, and Harris opens his eyes and grabs him, screaming. Melissa comes in and tells him to leave quickly. Scott can't find a solution except to go to Derek, who reported him and was going to be sent to jail. There, Scott apologizes to Derek for what he did and tells him about his dreams and how he can kill someone without feeling it. Derek says he can help him control his transformation, even during the full moon, but it won't be free. However, they don't have time for that now, so Scott returns to the bus and enters it with Stiles, who stays outside to watch. When Scott enters, he begins to remember how the transformation happened while he was asleep. He sees Allison and the true memory of the man screaming, and he feels like he was reaching out to Harris with someone else trying to attack him. Security arrives at the scene. Stiles sat quietly and gestured to Scott to quickly listen and escape before security caught him. When they got into the car, Stiles asked Scott if he remembered anything about the attack, and Scott revealed that he was actually present during the incident and had his own blood on the bus. He explained that he was not the one who attacked the driver, but instead, it was someone whose eyes sparkled like Derek's. Stiles asked if Derek wanted him to think he was the one who attacked the driver, and Scott reassured him and his friend that he did not attack anyone and was not a danger until now. They then went to Allison's house where Lydia was helping her choose an outfit to wear. Allison's father warned them not to go outside due to the curfew caused by the animal attacking people. However, Allison did not listen and went out the window and they all went to play bowling. Scott proved to be a skilled bowler, which surprised Allison and made Jackson jealous. During the game, Jackson teased and taunted Scott, making him feel self-conscious in front of Allison. When Scott threw his ball, it fell into the gutter and Jackson laughed at him. However, on his next turn, Scott got a strike and Allison was happy for him. After the game, Scott confronted Jackson and asked why he hated him. Jackson revealed that he knew something was wrong with Scott and he would not stop until he found out what it was. They then went to visit Derek, who had just visited Myers in the hospital and realized that Myers was not the one who attacked him. Derek was surprised that Scott knew about him and apologized to him. However, Melissa arrived and found that Myers had died, which shocked Scott. When Scott returned home, Stiles came in through the window and Scott's mother was about to hit him, thinking he was a thief. Stiles informed Scott that the driver had died and Scott was in shock. He went to Derek's house and accused him of killing the driver, just like he killed his sister. However, Derek denied it and revealed that the Alpha, the leader of their kind, was the one who bit Scott and was the most dangerous and powerful of their kind. They needed to find him and figure out why he bit Scott in particular. After that, Chris's sister, whose name is Kate, visits them in the city, but she is attacked by the Alpha. She manages to shoot him with a strange bullet as she is also a hunter, and then she calls her brother to come to her. Afterwards, the Alpha howls and calls his pack, and Derek sees the Alpha while he is trying to escape and catch him, but Kate manages to shoot him with a strange bullet and he falls to the ground. Chris arrives, and Kate tells him that the werewolf in front of them will die in 48 hours from the gunshot. Derek tries to heal himself but can't, and in the morning, he goes to school to find Scott. He meets Jackson instead and asks him about Scott, but Jackson talks to him rudely and tells him to find him himself and whoever he's dealing with, he will discover them and catch them both. Derek leaves, but Jackson grabs him and Derek grabs his head and claws him, but he feels himself and leaves quickly. He overhears Allison talking to Lydia and learns that Scott will come to study with her today. When he leaves, he stands in front of Stiles's car and falls to the ground. Scott runs to him quickly and tells him that he was shot with fire and can't heal himself. Scott tells him that he heard them and that he has 48 hours left. Derek leans on Scott, and they get into the car. Derek tells Scott that he needs to get a bullet like the one he was shot with to stop the infection and that he knows he's going to Allison's today and has to look for the bullet in her house before he dies. Scott drops Derek off at Allison's house, and when he enters, he looks at pictures of her father and sister Kate and also looks at the gun in the house. Allison tells him that her father is selling the gun to the government forces. Chris arrives, and they follow the car quickly, but sees them easily and tells them to come and help him instead of hiding like that. They enter the house and Scott joins them for dinner, while Allison's father remains upset. Stiles talks to him and assures him that they have achieved what they wanted. However, Scott tells him that they have not yet reached their goal. Later, Scott tries to enter Kate's room, but she catches him and he tells her that he needs to use the bathroom. She lets him in and he finds the suitcase, opens it, and retrieves the bullet that Derek needs. He sends the name of the box to Stiles, who is working at the animal clinic where Scott is employed. Derek insists that Scott bring the bullet immediately, so Scott apologizes to Allison's family, but they insist that he stay. Meanwhile, Derek tells Stiles that if Scott does not arrive in time, the infection will reach his heart and he will die. Therefore, there is only one solution, which is to amputate Derek's arm. Finally, Scott manages to leave the house and rushes to the clinic. When he arrives, Stiles has already amputated Derek's arm and thanks him for saving Derek's life. Derek takes the bullet, burns what's inside it, and places it in his wound. He screams in pain and falls to the ground, but eventually, his arm regains its natural form and he is able to heal himself. When he wakes up, Scott tells him that he should leave and stay away from him and Allison's family, instead of telling her father everything that happened. Derek reminds him that if Chris hears about this, he will kill Scott on the spot. He takes the bullet and they go to their uncle in the hospital, where they tell him that 6 years ago, they were in school with their sister when a fire broke out in their house. 11 members of their family were killed, including some who were not werewolves. Only Chris's family, who knew their whereabouts, could have been behind the fire. Their uncle is the only surviving member of the family, but he was badly burned in the fire. The episode begins with a worker in a DVD store standing on a ladder trying to change a light bulb on the ceiling. At the same time, outside the store, Lydia and Jackson are arguing in their car about which movie to watch. Jackson wants to watch a sports movie, but Lydia disagrees. Later, Jackson enters the store to get the movie that Lydia requested, but he cannot find anyone to help him. He starts looking around and suddenly sees 2 feet sticking out, and when he investigates, he discovers a dead body. Jackson panics and bumps into the ladder, causing the power to go out in the store. Meanwhile, Lydia is still in the car and unaware of what is happening. Jackson sees a terrifying creature in front of him and tries to hide among the shelves, but the creature knocks over all the shelves, trapping Jackson. The creature then walks away, and Jackson sees wounds on his neck. He tries to escape but the shelves fall on his leg, preventing him from moving. The police arrive, and Stiles and his father, the sheriff, get out of the car to investigate the murder. Stiles sees Jackson and talks to him, suggesting that he should be monitored because he may have suffered a head injury. However, Jackson insists that he is fine and can go home. Scott and Derek watch everything from the roof of the store and ask why the creature is killing people. Derek replies that he does not know the reason but they will find out. They leave the store and go to an old house where Scott tells Derek that he has important things to do and cannot help him. However, Derek insists that Scott has only 1 week left to transform and that this is his only chance to catch up. Meanwhile, Allison is in her room opening her bookshelf when she finds balloons coming out of it. She tries to hide them, but Scott sees her and asks if it is her birthday today. At first, Allison hesitates, but she eventually admits that she is turning 17 and is afraid of being bullied. However, Scott reassures her and asks her to spend the day with him to celebrate. In the classroom, the teacher tells the students that a parent-teacher meeting is important, especially for those who have low grades. Jackson enters the classroom, and the teacher tells him that he can leave if he needs to. Stiles asks Danny if he saw anything about the murder, but Danny denies it. Finally, we see Allison and Scott driving away from the school, and she asks him where they are going. Scott replies that he does not know and that they can go anywhere. Jackson goes to the bathroom to change his clothes, but Derek appears and asks him about what he saw yesterday. However, Jackson denies seeing anything real. After school, Stiles calls Scott, who finally answers and asks what he wants. Stiles asks if he knows anything about what happened to Jackson and Lydia, but Scott says no. Stiles decides to visit Lydia and check on her. He goes to her house, and her mother lets him in, telling him that she needs something to calm her nerves. Stiles enters and asks Lydia if she remembers anything, but she is not conscious. At the same time, Allison tries to talk to Lydia to make sure she is okay, but Scott tries to stop her. However, she insists on sending her a message and then turning off her phone. Stiles gets up to leave, but Lydia calls him and asks him to stay with her for a while. Before he leaves, Lydia receives a terrifying text message on her phone, which Stiles sees. It contains a picture of the creature that is killing people. Stiles tries to call Scott to inform him about the message, but Scott's phone is off. Meanwhile, the veterinarian calls Scott and leaves him a voicemail, asking where he is and telling him to let him know that he is okay. The police officer visits the veterinarian and asks him if he is sure that the bite he saw yesterday was from a mountain lion. The veterinarian shows him pictures from the surveillance camera at the store, which show a mountain lion walking on 2 legs and then standing on its hind legs. The officer asks if a mountain lion can walk on 2 legs, but the veterinarian replies that it's not supposed to, and he suggests that the officer go to an expert for more help. Later, Allison and Scott are driving back to her house, and she tells him that it was the best birthday she ever had. Suddenly, Scott remembers that there is a parent-teacher meeting happening, and he wonders what to do since it has already started. We then see Jackson's parents sitting with his teacher, who is thanking them for their involvement in his education. Meanwhile, Jackson is in terrible condition and does not know what is happening to him. In another classroom, Lydia's parents are arguing with her teacher, who has not said anything to her at all. He asks her what the problem is, but she says that there is no problem and that Lydia is doing great. In the economics class, Stiles' father, the police officer, is sitting with the teacher and tells him that Stiles is very good, but he mixes up his subjects to the point where he answers questions in his economics class as if they were history questions. Meanwhile, Scott's mother is in a meeting with his chemistry teacher and tries to talk to Scott, but his phone is off. The teacher tells her that Scott is going through a transitional period and needs a lab at home, but his mother says that Scott is better than most kids. In another place, we have Allison's mom and dad sitting with her teacher, who tells them that Allison is doing great and trying to adjust to her classmates. Allison's dad tells them that they understand her very well, and the teacher says that she is doing great, and they wish her the best. Then her dad asks her why she left early, and she says that she didn't even go to school at all. Later, Allison and Scott arrive at the school during pickup time, and Scott's mom tries to talk to him, but he avoids her. Allison's dad tries to call her on the phone, but Scott's mom answers and tells him that her son is not answering either. He tells her that her son kidnapped his daughter, and Scott's mom suggests that maybe his daughter encouraged her son to leave school. Before he can respond, Allison walks out of a car and apologizes, but they hear screaming and see people running. Scott goes to see what's going on and realizes that Allison could be hit by a car, so he runs after her. The officer tries to see where the noise is coming from, but a car hits him and he falls on the ground. He manages to take out his gun and they hear gunfire, but it's not from the officer's gun. They see Allison's dad hitting the animal with fire. The episode starts with Scott buying groceries and heading to the garage to get in his car, but he forgets where he parked and puts the bags on the ground. He then takes out the key and activates the car alarm to locate it. As he chases a rolling carton of milk on the ground, he suddenly feels a presence around him that is not natural. Scott realizes that it's the creature that bit him and runs to escape, but the creature runs after him, and Scott tries to avoid it by triggering the alarms of all the cars in the garage to drown out his heartbeat. The plan succeeds, but Scott's phone suddenly rings, and he feels a hand grab him. It turns out to be Derek, not the creature. Scott tells Derek that he felt scared and helpless because of the terrifying creature, but he doesn't remember any other details about it. Derek asks him about his thoughts regarding the incident, and Scott confesses that he's afraid of the creature and doesn't know how to confront it. Derek tells Scott that he needs to get rid of his weakness, which is Allison, and anything else that distracts him from his anger. He takes Scott's phone and breaks it, warning him to stay away from Allison because she makes him weak and prevents him from reaching his full potential. Scott agrees with Derek's advice, but as soon as he leaves, he goes straight to Allison. Her aunt had written a history project about a monster named Gévaudan who attacked people in France for over 3 years. Scott listens to their conversation, and after Kate leaves, he jumps out of the window. However, he feels something strange as he lands and thinks that Derek is still following him to scare him. He calls Derek and apologizes for not listening to him earlier. Suddenly, Scott sees the terrifying creature again and runs to his car, managing to open the door and get in, but the creature catches up and leaves a snail trail on the window. Scott finally reaches home, locks all the windows, but as soon as he turns on the light, he finds Derek sitting in his room, waiting for him. Derek asks Scott how he felt when he saw the creature. Scott replies to Stiles saying, "I felt anger, but I didn't actually get angry, I just felt the presence of anger within me." Derek suddenly appears and asks Scott how he knew he was there. Scott explains that he saw a snail trail on the window, which meant Derek had been there. Derek then warns Scott to stay away from Allison again. The next day, Scott goes to school and tries to avoid Allison and Jackson. Stiles helps Scott practice controlling his anger by taking him to the nearby forest and throwing balls at him while monitoring his heart rate with a heart rate monitor and the captain's phone app. Meanwhile, Allison tells Lydia about the story of the Gévaudan monster that killed over 100 people in France and shows her a picture of the beast, which looks like a wolf. Lydia leaves for history class while Allison stays behind. Scott and Stiles eventually reconcile and go out together during class. Stiles asks Scott if he really wants to connect with his animal side, and Scott says yes but doesn't know how to control his anger. Stiles suggests that he think about things that make him feel powerful and confident. Scott tells Stiles that he can't deal with Allison because he feels weak around her. They go to the bathroom, and Scott tells Stiles that he's upset because it means he prefers being alone like Derek. But Stiles assures him that they'll find a way to make it work. Scott smells a strange odor and tells Stiles that it smells like something dead. They see Jackson looking sick and he sees something coming out of his stomach. He sees a black hand with claws, but when he looks again, it's gone. They leave the bathroom and find Allison sitting on the ground reading a book. Jackson apologizes to her for his behavior earlier and tells her that he's not a monster. He asks for her forgiveness and admits that he likes her and Scott. The bell rings, and they go to class. Scott tells Stiles to sit behind him so Allison won't see him, but she sits down before Stiles can and talks to Scott about his broken phone. The teacher asks Scott a question, but he doesn't respond. Stiles notices Scott's heart rate increasing every time the teacher yells at him. Suddenly, the heart rate drops, and Stiles sees that Scott is holding Allison's hand. After class, Stiles tells Scott to think of Allison whenever he gets angry so he won't hurt anyone. They go to the school garage, and Stiles tells Scott to wait there. Stiles goes to a big car and damages it with a key, angry with Scott. The workers attack Scott, but he thinks of Allison again and calms down. They're punished by the chemistry teacher and are forced to stay in the lab. Scott apologizes to the teacher because he has work at the vet clinic. After they reconcile, the teacher lets them go. Derek goes to the vet and asks about the deer with the snail, but the doctor denies any involvement. Derek hears the doctor's heartbeat and accuses him of lying. The doctor attacks Derek, but Scott arrives and tells Derek to run. Scott transforms into a wolf-like creature and warns Derek not to hurt him again. Scott tells Derek to meet him at the school garage in an hour. An hour later, Scott, Stiles, meet Derek at the garage. They try to call out to the creature, but it doesn't respond. Scott makes a terrifying wolf howl, and the locks on the garage start shaking from the force. They hear Derek's voice and try to answer him, but the door is open, and is gone. Suddenly, the creature appears and attacks Derek, killing him quickly. Scott and Stiles run away trying to escape the creature. The episode begins with Scott and Stiles hiding from the werewolf and barricading themselves inside the school. Scott suggests they need something to prop up the door, and they see Stiles' metal shears lying outside. Stiles goes to retrieve them, but Scott spots the werewolf standing near Stiles' car and calls out to him to hurry back. Stiles rushes to the school and manages to enter before the werewolf can catch him. They lock the door and hear the werewolf's growls inside the school. They head to the nearest classroom and try to lock the door with a desk, but Stiles tells Scott it won't hold. He reveals his dislike for Dr. Deaton and tells Scott that the werewolf is after them. Scott is skeptical and doesn't believe it could be him. Stiles suggests they need to get to his car to escape, and they go to the windows to look outside. Stiles points out that the windows won't open, but Scott suggests they break them. Stiles warns that it will make too much noise and the werewolf will hear them. Scott suggests they run after breaking the windows, but he notices something odd about Stiles' car engine cover. Stiles asks him what's wrong, and Scott tells him that it's bent out of shape. Before he can finish, something crashes into the window from outside, shattering it. Stiles spots that it's his own car battery. They leave to find another hiding place, and Stiles suggests they change into gym clothes in a locker room with fewer windows. Scott advises Stiles to call his dad to come to their aid, but Stiles is worried that the werewolf will find them if the police come. They try to think of a plan, but soon realize that even if they escape the school, they are far away from Stiles' car. Scott suggests they try to find Derek's car outside. Stiles agrees, and they head to the door, but before Stiles can open it, Scott stops him and listens for any sounds outside. Stiles opens the door, and they both enter the hallway. Peering through the slots in the lockers, they see a pair of normal human eyes, and Stiles opens the locker to reveal a janitor, who tells them to leave immediately. As they exit the locker room, they see the janitor being killed by the werewolf. Scott tries to save him, but Stiles stops him and urges him to run. At this time, Allison is standing on the street waiting for Scott, who is half an hour late. Jackson calls her and tells her that they are coming to pick her up. When they arrive, he asks Allison if they can stop by his house and see why he's been delayed. However, at that moment, Allison receives a message on her phone. Meanwhile, Scott and Stiles are stuck at school not knowing how to get out. Suddenly, Scott sees the Transformer standing on the school roof, and they start running as the Transformer chases them. Jackson, Lydia, and Allison arrive at the school and Jackson asks Allison why she brought them to the school. Allison shows him the message she received and sees Scott. Jackson asks her to go meet him at the school, but Lydia suggests they go look for Scott. Scott and Stiles are on the ground floor trying to escape from the Transformer. Stiles comes up with an idea and throws the keys where there are no windows, and the Transformer goes after the keys. Scott and Stiles block him and trap him. Stiles stops and tells him that he's not afraid of him because he's trapped now. However, the Transformer jumps up and enters the air conditioning vents and sees them. Lydia and Jackson enter the school because Lydia needs the bathroom. While inside, Jackson sees a strange moving body and thinks it's Scott, but he doesn't come out. He then remembers Derek, but when he sees the body again, it's transformed into a wolf-like creature. Lydia asks him if he found them, but he says no. Allison is still looking for Scott near the swimming pool when Lydia calls her to find out where she is. Scott hears the ringtone and tells Stiles that it's Allison's phone. Stiles calls her, and Allison answers and tells her that she's at the swimming pool. Scott asks her what brought her here, and she shows him the message she received, but Allison senses that he didn't send it. Stiles asks her what Jackson and Lydia are doing, and at that moment, they hear movement in the ceiling. The Transformer jumps down, and they start running and enter a restaurant. They try to block the door with the tables and chairs, but Stiles asks what they'll do about all the windows. Allison asks if anyone can explain what's happening, and she's very scared. Scott tells them that Derek killed the janitor and is seeking revenge against Allison's family. Stiles interrupts them and says that they need to figure out how to get out of this situation. Lydia tries to call the police, but the receptionist hangs up on her and tells her that they've received false reports of danger at the school. Stiles takes Scott aside and tells him that they need to figure out how to get out of there. Scott tells him that if the Transformer wanted to kill them, he would have done so already. Stiles asks him why he left them, and Scott tells him that he wants to take revenge on Allison's family. Jackson interrupts them and suggests they figure out what to do now. He asks Stiles to call his dad, but Stiles refuses and says he won't watch his own father die. Jackson turns around, and Stiles hits him hard. Allison is running to see what happened, and Stiles is trying to call his parents but his phone is locked. He leaves a message to call him back and finds someone trying to open the door. Stiles tells them he's at school and to come to him there. He then tells everyone that the kitchen door leads to the roof, where they can escape through the emergency ladder and get to Jackson's car. However, the door is locked, and Scott suggests they get the keys from the janitor's body, but Allison insists they need something to defend themselves with as well. Lydia comes up with the idea to make a Molotov cocktail from chemicals in the lab. They make the bomb, and Scott goes to get the keys while the others wait. Scott smells blood from the janitor's body and follows the scent to the basketball court, where he finds the keys and the janitor's killer, who attacks him. Scott tries to use the bomb but it doesn't work, and the killer grabs him. Jackson comes to help but is injured, and Scott turns into a wolf and fights the killer off. Later, Scott returns to the lab and puts the key in the door, but he hears Allison and decides to leave. Lydia suggests they go to the window and they hear police cars outside. Scott tells Stiles that the killer wants to kill his old group before joining him. Stiles asks who his old group is, and Scott names Allison, Jackson, Lydia, and himself. Scott sees the vet in an ambulance and asks him how he escaped. The vet says it was difficult but he survived thanks to Scott. In the end, Scott tries to talk to Allison, but she asks him to stay away from her and not to call her again. The episode starts with Stiles taking Scott with him and insisting that he stays with him instead of going home because his mom is worried. Scott tries to explain to him that he needs to go back home, but Stiles argues that he can't leave him alone and they end up staying up late together in the woods around a campfire. Stiles tells Scott not to be too upset about Allison breaking up with him because there are many other pretty girls out there, especially with blonde hair and green eyes like Lydia. Scott asks him how he knows he's talking about Lydia, but Stiles doesn't answer. Suddenly, two guys show up and take Stiles' drink and laugh at him. Scott asks them to give the drink back, but one of them laughs and takes a sip. Scott gets angry and tries to take the drink back, but the guy gets scared and throws it at him, breaking it on a tree. Scott's eyes change and the guy gets scared and runs away. Later, Scott and Stiles are walking to the car and Scott asks Stiles to explain what happened to him. Stiles tries to blame it on Scott being upset about Allison, but Scott suspects there's more to it and asks if it's because of the full moon. Suddenly, they hear a strange sound and see the two guys they encountered earlier standing in the distance. One of them lights a cigarette and disappears, and the other gets attacked by a werewolf and thrown into the fire. The next day, Scott wakes up to his alarm and hears on the radio that the school is open again after being closed for 2 days. His mom comes in and asks if he's ready to go back to school, and offers to let him stay home another day if he needs to. She also tries to talk to him about the girl he likes and offers advice, but Scott insists that he'll figure it out himself. Meanwhile, Allison arrives at school with her father and aunt, and her father tries to convince her to homeschool, but Kate opens the door for her to get out. Chris confronts her about being late and tells her that he was going to tell her that they needed to stop for gas. Scott arrives at school and goes to his chemistry class. He tries to talk to Allison, but the teacher tells him to stay in his seat and start the exam. However, Scott finds himself experiencing a heightened sense of perception where he can see and hear things differently. He runs out of the exam and Stiles follows him, finding Scott's bag on the ground. Stiles picks up Scott's phone and hears a strange noise coming from it, leading them to the changing room where they find Scott standing under the shower, struggling to breathe. Stiles hands him an inhaler and Scott asks if he had an asthma attack, but Stiles tells him it was a panic attack because he thought he had asthma, and the inhaler was a placebo. Scott tells Stiles he can't forget what happened and that he felt like his heart was breaking when he saw Allison. Stiles tries to reassure him that it's just heartbreak, but Scott insists that he felt the emotions of everyone in the classroom. Stiles suggests keeping Scott locked up in his room because the full moon is happening, but Scott questions if that's enough punishment. Meanwhile, Allison's Aunt Kate is in the office with her brother and assistants, planning to go out at night to hunt the werewolf. Chris suggests that tonight is the best night to catch it because it won't be fully focused. At lunch, Allison is eating in the cafeteria with Jackson, who refuses her offer of food. He complains of a pain in his neck and asks if she remembers what she did to Scott. Scott, who is sitting outside, overhears their conversation. Later, at practice, the coach announces that Scott is the new captain of the team, replacing Jackson. Stiles sees Lydia and asks Scott to go talk to her and find out if she's interested in him. Scott goes to talk to Lydia in private, but instead of asking about Stiles, he asks if Allison likes him. Lydia tells him that Allison does like him, but only as a friend, and that she's grateful to him for protecting them during the lockdown. Meanwhile, Allison is being taught how to use a gun by her aunt, who asks her why she's upset. Allison admits that it has to do with Scott and tells her how she felt that he was right for her, and she tells her that everything was going well until the day she saw Derek killing the worker. Her aunt tells her to wait and tell her everything she said about Derek. At the same time, Stiles goes to Scott's house with a large bag of things and his mother enters and asks him if Scott is okay or not. Stiles tells her that there is nothing wrong, but his mother insists that the problem is that he's not talking to her at all and she walks away to go to work. They see the moon rising and Stiles is sitting with Scott, who tells him that he thinks he will be tied up with chains like a dog. Stiles reassures him and suddenly he grabs his hand in the iron on the wall. Allison goes to a sports equipment store and sees Jackson there. He tells her that she looks upset and needs to talk to someone. Allison sits with Jackson in the car and tells him that she thinks that what was in the school was not Derek, and Jackson responds that he also feels that way. Allison continues and tells him that the bigger problem is that she feels that her father is lying to her and that they are not a normal family. She also feels that he knows something about what happened in the school and is not willing to tell her. Scott tries to free his hand from the iron so much that his hand hurts, and Stiles closes the door and sits outside. Suddenly, Stiles feels a strange calmness and goes to see Scott, but he is surprised that he broke the iron and escaped from the house. Scott runs in the forest and reaches the garage where Jackson and Allison are. Jackson tells Allison about the creature he saw and how it walked on its legs and hands like a wolf. Scott hears Allison's voice with his heightened senses while she talks to Jackson, and he goes there and sees them sitting together in the car. Scott's anger takes over and he transforms completely, jumping on the roof of the car and breaking it. Another werewolf attacks him and he falls, and Derek appears. Derek stops him and Scott turns back to his human form and asks him what happened to him. Derek tells him that what happened to him was caused by the one who wants to be the Alpha. Styles is looking for Scott but sees an ambulance and police car, so he stops and checks on his father. In the end, Derek takes Scott home, but Scott tells him that he wants a solution because he can't continue living like this. He asks Derek if there is any cure for his condition, and Derek tells him that there is only one cure, which is to kill the one who bit him. Scott asks if he has to kill the Alpha, and Derek says that if he helps him find him, he will help him kill him. Jackson returns home and gets out of the car, but he sees something strange at the door. He notices a large hawk, which grabs Jackson and enters the house. The hawk takes off one of Jackson's gloves and approaches it. Jackson realizes that this hawk belongs to Scott. Derek goes to the teacher Adrian and tells him that Laura, Derek's sister, was looking for him. Adrian denies knowing anything and begs Derek not to kill him. Suddenly, Derek appears and takes the teacher. They hide and escape quickly. The police appear and chase Derek, but he encounters Chris and talks to his sister, telling her that Derek is in front of him and asks who he is running after. Kate gets on her car and chases after them. Scott and Styles, who are in the car, manage to escape from Kate and Chris shoots Derek with an arrow. They pick up Derek and flee, and Scott asks him why he was at the school and what he was looking for. Derek tells him that his sister was close to discovering something, and he discovered two things. First, that the teacher Adrian was involved in the matter, and second, the drawing that Scott saw before and looked confused. Derek asks Scott if he had seen it before, and Scott admits that he saw it in the same chain with Allison. The next day, Scott and Styles go to school and think about how to get the chain from Allison. After much thought, Styles suggests that they should steal it from her. Finally, they come up with a plan to get the chain so that Scott can track down the Alpha and kill him, and finally be free. Jackson goes to the doctor to check the wounds on his neck, and the doctor tells him that he ate a special herb. Jackson is surprised and asks what kind of herb it was. The doctor explains that it is a poison called aconite or wolf's bane, but he assures Jackson not to worry about the wounds because they will heal on their own. Later, Jackson researches the herb and finds information about it. He then goes to talk to Scott and tells him that he knows what he is going through. Scott is confused and doesn't understand what Jackson is talking about, but Jackson tells him that he wants to be like him. Scott asks him how, and Jackson suggests getting bitten, scratched, or even using magical dirt. He doesn't care what it takes, as long as he can be like Scott. Jackson then tells Scott that he will tell Allison everything and leaves. Scott talks to Styles about what happened, and Styles tells him that nobody will believe him if he tells anyone. Scott worries that if Allison's father finds out, he will kill him. Styles suggests that they forget about everything and just focus on getting the chain. Scott agrees and goes to class, trying to talk to Allison. However, she doesn't want to talk to him and leaves the classroom. Scott follows her and calls out to her, but she tells him that he sent her the pictures, and that's not enough. She wants to feel safe again and needs time to rebuild their friendship. In the cafeteria, Scott tells Styles that Allison doesn't want to talk to him. Styles suggests that they go to Plan B and get the chain from Allison, even if they have to steal it. Later, Jackson calls Scott and tells him that he can hear him and that it's one of his abilities. Scott doesn't listen to Jackson's warning and acts foolishly. However, Jackson tells him that if he doesn't transform like him, he will take Allison away from him. Jackson cuts ties with Lydia to make time for Allison. Derek goes to Styles' house and asks him if Scott was able to get the chain. Styles tells him that he hasn't yet, but they can try another approach. Styles tells Derek that the night they were trapped in the school, Scott sent a message to Allison to meet him there. However, Scott didn't send the message, and they need to track down the sender to find out who did it. Scott goes to Allison's house to look for the chain and brings his friend Danny to help him decode the message. Finally, Scott discovers the location of the chain in an old book, which also teaches him some werewolf words. While Danny is investigating the origin of the message, he discovers that it was sent from Melissa McCall's computer at the hospital. Meanwhile, Styles and Derek are surprised when Chris catches Scott and takes him inside his house. Chris asks Scott about his relationship with Derek and warns him that he needs to protect his daughter's safety. Allison enters at this moment and Scott tells her that everything he's been doing has been to keep her safe, which is very important to him. Chris tells him that he needs to leave now because he has an important match tonight. When Scott goes to the match, he calls Styles to check where he is, and he finds out that he's with Derek. Derek asks Scott if the chain has a secret compartment, but Scott tells him that it's flat and there's no hidden place in it. He tells Styles that he should stay at the match, and if his dad asks, he'll say that he'll be a little late. Derek and Styles stand in front of the hospital to find out what happened and how the message was followed. In the match, Jackson sits next to Scott and tells him that it's the bite that's been causing all this. Scott gets fed up with Jackson and tells him that it's the Alpha who can do something about it. Jackson tells him to let him do it, but Scott says that they don't know who the Alpha is and that it's not easy because there are hunters who want to kill them. Jackson laughs at him and says that there's a whole family of hunters. Scott looks at Allison and Jackson notices and tells him that Allison's family is the hunters. Scott says it's not them and asks if he thinks he's stupid. He tells him the name of the family is Argent and asks if he knows what Argent means in French. It means silver. The situation is clearer now. Styles goes to find Derek's uncle Peter in his room, but he's not there. So Derek understands and tells Styles to leave quickly because his uncle is the Alpha. Suddenly, Styles sees Peter in front of him with a conspiring nurse, and he stands there wanting to scream, but Derek enters and hits the nurse, saying that it was her who killed his sister. However, his uncle tells him that he didn't intend to kill Laura. Peter holds Derek back and hits him, causing him to fall to the ground, telling him that everything he did was to stop the fire. Derek hits him back, and they continue to fight while the police investigate with Argent. Argent tells them that he met a girl in a bar and talked to her about his work, and she knew how to start a big fire. He drew the shape of the chain that Allison wears and said that if he saw someone wearing it, then that person is the one who started the fire for Derek's family. Meanwhile, Jackson tells Scott that he has 3 days to turn him, or he'll carry out his threat. In front of the audience, Kate notices the wound on Jackson's neck and asks her brother if it's possible to turn someone by scratching them. He tells her that it's possible if the scratch is deep, and she tells him to look at Jackson's neck. Scott overhears their conversation. The match ends with Scott's team winning, and Allison enters to congratulate him. After that, her father takes her away, and in the locker room, everyone leaves. The lights go out, and Derek enters with Peter, who tells Scott that he never understood the game of lacrosse and why people play it. Scott realizes that Peter is the Alpha and refuses to help him, but Peter tells him that he only wants to kill those responsible, and Allison is not one of them. Scott looks at Derek and tells him that he forgot that he's the one who killed his sister, but Derek says that he didn't mean to do it. Peter tells him that they're there to help him, and he needs to see things from their perspective. He then claws Scott's neck, and Scott falls to the ground in pain. Suddenly, he sees a vision of the nurse that Peter killed, and Peter sitting in a chair burned and injured. When he wakes up, Styles comes running towards him, saying that he wants to tell him about a disaster that happened, but Scott tells him that he already knows. At Allison's house, she sits in her room looking for her necklace, then goes outside and sees her father and aunt in the garage. She tells her father that Chris won't tell her about their family business, but Chris says he's not ready yet. As they leave, Allison notices the gun her father and aunt were carrying and realizes they knew she was listening. The next morning, Jackson's car breaks down and Chris offers to fix it. When he opens the hood, he sees the claw marks on Jackson's wound and realizes that he's been attacked by a werewolf. Scott and Styles arrive, and Chris warns Jackson that he's in danger because he's been marked by an Alpha. Jackson insists that he can handle himself, but Scott tells him that he needs to be careful because Chris won't be able to protect him forever. Later, Allison and her friend Lydia go to the woods to test the arrowhead she found. They hear a noise and follow it, but they are attacked by a werewolf. Allison uses her stun gun to defend herself, but Scott appears and takes the stun gun from her. He falls to the ground in pain, and Allison apologizes for what happened. She tells him that her father found out about their relationship and wants her to break up with him. Scott then goes to Styles' house, where his father is working on the case. Styles' father tells Scott that the case is connected to multiple crimes, including the insurance investigator who died in the Hale fire. He questions why Derek would start with his sister, who had nothing to do with the fire. Later, Allison goes to Scott's house and tells him that she has discovered some secrets about her family. She overhears strange conversations and believes they're connected to Derek's family. Melissa, Scott's mother, interrupts them and tells them that a medical representative is coming to visit them for dinner. The delivery guy arrives at Peter's Alpha house, and Scott tells him that he's going to tell everything to his mom, but Peter tells him that he won't be able to expose himself in front of his mom, and he won't do anything to jeopardize their situation. He encourages Scott to stay on his team, saying that he doesn't understand the magnitude of their power and what they could achieve if they were all together, me, you, Derek, and even Melissa. Scott tries to tell her, but he can't, so Derek goes to Jackson's training room and tells him that he's not afraid of him. Derek says that he's lying if he says he's not scared, but he doesn't have to be afraid anymore if he stays with them. Scott quickly apologizes to Allison and tells her that he has to go on an important errand, but he'll be back. Later, she sees Derek and Jackson together with Melissa and Peter in a car, and then Styles comes and knocks them from behind, of course, under Scott's orders. Styles gets out of the car and acts like an idiot, unintentionally, and Peter is happy with Scott's good behavior. Styles continues the act and tells Melissa that he doesn't know where they came from, but Melissa says they were just standing there, and asks if he's an idiot or something. Styles tells them that they need to call the police because of the damage that happened, but Peter says it's not important. Peter tells Scott, who he knows is listening, that he's very smart for a teenager, and they need to take advantage of that on our team. He says that Scott is much smarter than the stupid Jackson, who thinks he knows everything about us, but he actually knows more than he should, and Scott understands that they want to eliminate Jackson. Derek and Jackson go to Derek's house so Jackson can transform like Derek. As soon as Jackson enters the house, he tells Derek that he dreamt about the house before and has seen these stairs and walls before. Then Derek extends his claws, and Jackson realizes that he came here to kill him. Jackson begs him to let him go, promising that he will keep quiet and won't tell anyone anything. He also promises to leave Scott alone. Derek tells him that someone should come and save him, but nobody cares about him because he is always doing horrible things to people, and he is widely despised. Scott suddenly appears and tells him that he cares about him. Scott attacks Derek and transforms into a werewolf. They suddenly hit Chris and Kate's house with fire, and Scott gets shot in the stomach. Derek grabs him and escapes, while Allison is still waiting for him at home. Kate sends her a message, saying that they need to talk. Meanwhile, Scott is walking in the woods, injured by the gunshot, and he falls to the ground, losing consciousness. The doctor finally saves him and tells him that he gave him something to speed up his recovery. Allison goes to meet Kate and tells her that every family has its own secrets, and when she enters the darkness, she sees someone hanging from the ceiling. Kate turns on the flashlight and reveals that it is Derek in his transformed state. The episode begins with Allison driving her car in the rain and thinking about what she saw: Derek, who is tied up, and her aunt who is electrocuting him and calling him a predator. She shows her aunt's fangs and tells her that there is another one like him, but their leader is called Alpha and he is very savage. Allison sees a police car with flashing lights and pulls over. All of this while she is still thinking about her aunt and how she was afraid when she first found out what they were doing, but she believes she has a talent for it and tells her that she will help her catch the other werewolf. The officer gets out of the car and approaches her, asking if there is anything wrong. She tells him that she was just driving a little too fast and not paying attention. Meanwhile, Scott wakes up in the veterinary clinic, and the doctor tells him to relax. They hear a noise outside, and the doctor goes to see who it is. He finds Peter, who tells him that he is here to take something that belongs to him, but the doctor tells him that he hasn't left anything here. We can see that there is a strange challenge in their eyes, and despite Peter's persistence to enter, the doctor is firm with him. However, Peter approaches the gate and realizes that he cannot pass through the small opening. He understands that the doctor has sprinkled ash from the mountain, which prevents him from passing through. He hits the doctor with a chair, and the doctor falls and breaks, as if there is nothing wrong with him. He calmly tells him that they are closed now, and Peter goes to the door, but before he leaves, he stops and says that there is someone else who can help him. Scott hears him from inside and understands that he wants to tell him something and that he probably means Allison. Scott goes back home and tries to find his phone but can't find it. Styles tells him not to buy another one for now, and if Derek were here, he could help him. Styles tells him that Derek is probably dead now, but Scott says that if Allison's family wants to catch the Alpha, they need to keep Derek safe. Kate talks to Derek and asks him if he wants to tell her who he is protecting. Derek asks her if she wants to kill him herself or protect him, and tells her that if she wants to continue torturing him, she can go ahead, but he won't say anything. Kate tells him that she doesn't want to torture him, she just wants information from him. Scott goes to the roof of Allison's house at night and watches over her while she sleeps to keep her safe. The next day, he goes to school and the coach tells him that he can't go to the upcoming dance because he failed 2 classes and the teachers in those subjects already told him to let Scott go from the team, but the coach refused. The only solution for Scott now is to not attend the dance, but he wants to go to keep an eye on Allison because of Peter. He takes Styles and goes to Jackson and tries to convince him to go to the dance with them and watch over Allison. Jackson refuses and tells him that he doesn't care, but Scott tells him that he needs to help Allison because he owes him for saving his life. However, Jackson refuses and leaves them. Styles tells Scott that he saw everything and what he said to Jackson was right, but Scott is not satisfied with Jackson's decision and goes after him and transforms, grabbing Jackson and threatening him. After Jackson sees what Scott can do, he runs to Allison to tell her that he will go with her to the dance. Scott watches them and Styles tells him that he can relax now because Allison is safe, but Scott surprises him by saying that they are still going to the dance. Styles asks him if he has a ticket, a car, or a girl to go with, but Scott answers no, and Styles asks him if he is going to help him, and Scott nods. Meanwhile, Allison and Lydia go to the mall to buy things for the dance and Allison asks Lydia who she is going with, and they discuss Styles who is in the same mall with them. Lydia is contemplating and taking Styles with her to the store to pick out many dresses. She has him carry them while she goes to try them on, and Allison watches, attempting to choose a dress. However, she sees Peter in the mirrors and he tells her that the color does not suit her complexion. She chooses another dress as the mall makes announcements about her missing friend whose hijab was pulled off, causing her to leave Allison and run to the car while Scott watches her. Scott hears the hunter saying that he is really talented but warns him that he may not always be available for his girlfriend. Meanwhile, Kate is still trying to figure out from Derek who the werewolf is and asks him if he told his sister about her. She realizes that he did not mention their relationship to anyone and reassures him that it is normal for a werewolf to be attracted to a beautiful girl. She suddenly understands that the other werewolf they are looking for may be someone who loves Allison, and asks if it could be Jackson. However, Scott loves Allison, not Jackson. Scott gets ready for the party and puts his suit on the bed, but his mother sees it and asks where he got it. She finds out that it is an old suit and notices a rip in his pants. She tells him to bring it to her to fix and asks who he is going with. He says he is going alone, but his mother asks if there is no other girl besides Allison. He admits that he only loves her, but has not told her yet. His mother advises him to tell her because girls like to hear that they are loved. Allison and Jackson arrive at the party, and she asks if Scott is coming. Jackson tells her that he knows he is not coming because he is grounded, but Scott is actually watching her from a high place in the room to observe what is happening. He sees Styles ask Lydia to dance, and when she initially refuses, he changes his approach and tells her that he is the only one who sees the beauty inside her and that she won an international prize in mathematics. Lydia is impressed and agrees to dance with him, while Scott watches. Suddenly, Scott's coach calls him and tells him to come to him. Scott runs away to avoid him, and Allison laughs at what he is doing. Scott then goes to Allison and dances with her, and Jackson leaves the party to go to his car. However, he sees a moving red light in the forest and remembers the werewolf, so he goes to investigate it. Lydia feels a strange urge and looks around but can't find Jackson. She asks Styles to relax for a bit, but he understands that she is looking for Jackson, who is walking in the forest and calling out to the werewolf, asking him to turn him into one. Scott tries to confess his feelings to Allison, but she doesn't give him a chance. Chris Argent brings Jackson to the party again and asks him what he will do with the fact that Scott is not a predator. Jackson is nervous, and Styles senses that something is wrong and asks him what happened. Jackson starts telling him what happened, and we see Lydia still looking for him. She reaches the field and calls out to him, but all the floodlights come on, and Peter appears and goes to her. Styles runs to her and tells her to run away. Unfortunately, Peter attacks her, and Styles pleads with him to let her go. Peter tells him he'll let her go if he tells him where Derek is. Styles reluctantly tells him everything he knows, and Peter asks him how he knows where Derek is. Styles replies that GPS is on all phones nowadays and that he can track him down. In the end, we see Scott and Allison leaving the party and Allison joking with Scott from the bus window. But before they can leave, two cars surround them, and Chris Argent gets out of one of them. Scott transforms into a wolf, and Allison can't believe her eyes. The episode begins with Allison appearing and looking at Scott in horror as he transforms and runs away. We then see Styles sitting on the ground next to Lydia and telling Peter that he won't leave her, but Peter insists that he must come with him. However, Styles says that he doesn't care and asks Peter to kill him, but Peter tells him that he can talk to his friend Jackson to come help them. Allison gets off the bus and is unable to walk, but her father catches up to her and tells her not to be afraid. He takes her in his car while Scott is running in the forest. Jackson is carrying Lydia and running towards the school, yelling for help. Peter rides with Styles in his car and finds Styles very upset about Lydia. Peter tells him not to worry because if she survives, she will become very strong. Meanwhile, Chris is at home and asks his sister why she told Allison about their secret. She says that Allison had to know, but Chris asks her what brought her there and why she won't tell him so he can help her. She asks if she's wrong for wanting to help him, and Chris tells her that he doesn't know if she really wants to help him. Kate responds by asking if he wanted her to see the Alpha killing people randomly and just stay quiet about it. Chris explains that the killings are not random and that the officer found a link between the victims and a fire incident at the Argent house. Kate realizes that this is another reason to tell Allison since they blamed them for the fire. Kate then tells Chris that she's sure the Alpha is someone close to Derek and that they're being targeted. Chris agrees and asks her to take Allison away from the house and go to Washington. However, Kate is angry and asks him if he thinks he can catch the Alpha without her. Chris is serious about protecting Allison and tells her to get ready to leave in an hour. Allison's mother tells her that she's not sure how long they'll stay there, but she'll provide her with all the clothes she needs. Allison's phone rings, but her mother sees who is calling and hangs up. Allison asks who it was, and her mother tells her it was Jackson. Allison then asks her mother what they will do to Scott, and her mother tells her that they have a rule to follow, especially when dealing with young werewolves. Scott wakes up from his thoughts when he hears dogs howling in an unnatural way. Peter takes out his laptop and tells Styles to access Scott's account to track his phone and find out where they're keeping Derek. And Styles opens the laptop but tells Peter that he needs to know the username and password for Scott's account. Peter says that he knows them, but Styles says no. Peter replies, "Never mind that I can hear your heartbeat and I can still smell the scent of lies." Jackson enters the hospital and asks about Lydia's condition. The officer holds him and demands to know what happened to the girl. Jackson claims he doesn't know, but the officer tells him it's his responsibility since he's always with her. Jackson responds that she went to the party with Styles today, not with him. The officer orders his assistants to find Styles. Styles opens Scott's account for Peter, who asks if he has done what Peter asked for. Styles replies that he won't help Scott, but Peter explains that wolves hunt in packs because they prefer a bigger prey. Therefore, he needs both Derek and Scott. Styles says that Scott won't agree to help. Peter responds that Scott will help because he cares about Allison, just like Styles cares about Scott. Scott is on top of a big mountain, howling like a wolf, and hears Derek's response. He comes down to the forest and listens to Derek. Styles wonders if Derek is held captive in their house, but Peter corrects him, saying it's under the house. Meanwhile, Allison visits Lydia in the hospital and goes with Kate, who tells her that people can't change and asks if she means all of them. Allison replies with even Scott? Kate confirms that Scott is one of them. Peter packs his things in the car and tells Styles to give him his keys. Styles asks if Peter is going to kill him, but Peter reassures him that he just heard his heartbeat and knows he's lying to himself. Scott arrives at Allison's house and finds the gate they used to enter under the house. Styles arrives at the hospital and meets his parents, who ask him where he was. He apologizes and says he lost his keys. They ask about Lydia, but they don't know what's wrong with her. They also ask about Scott, but he has no information about him. Meanwhile, the hunter attacks Derek to continue torturing him. Styles comes out with his parents, who tell him to go sit with his friends. But Styles asks his dad if he knows anything about what's happening with Derek and his family. His dad says yes, he has some information. He tells Styles that the fire at Derek's house was intentional and asks how he knows. Styles says he had a witness who saw it happen, but he won't reveal the witness's identity. He tells his dad that they know it was intentional and that a young woman in her late 20s was involved. She was wearing a distinctive necklace. His parents then walk away to answer their phone. Styles remembers something and runs off. Meanwhile, we see Derek telling Scott to let him go, but Scott tells him he won't until he promises to help him first. Derek says they don't have time to talk because Peter is coming, but Scott is determined and tells him he won't let him go until he promises to help him save Allison and her family from Peter. Derek asks Scott if he thinks he's willing to sacrifice his life for Allison. He tells him he's just a child who thinks he knows everything, but Scott interrupts him and says he knows something Derek doesn't. He tells him that Peter said he didn't know what he was doing when he killed his sister. Scott tells him that Peter is a liar and shows him a picture of a deer with a snail on it. We see Jackson and Styles getting into Jackson's car to catch up with Scott. But before they can leave the hospital, they run into Chris, who asks them where Scott is. Styles tries to tell him he doesn't know, but Jackson gets agitated and Chris realizes they know where Scott is. He takes them to a room in the hospital to get information from them. Meanwhile, Scott finishes telling Derek what he knows and shows him the picture. Derek breaks the iron bars and tells Scott he'll help him. At the same time, Chris has Styles cornered and asks him if his friend trapped him in the metal on full moon night so he wouldn't get killed. Styles admits to it but says he didn't mean to trap him and it was an accident. Chris tells him he doesn't have time for rumors, but Styles asks him if they don't have a law they follow. Chris replies yes, and Styles asks him what they do to those who break their law. Chris tells him no one breaks it, but Styles says his sister did. Meanwhile, Derek and Scott are walking in the woods towards Derek's house when Derek feels something strange and stops. He tells Scott there's something wrong. Suddenly, an arrow hits Derek and they see it's Allison with her aunt who's been shooting at them. Another arrow hits Derek's leg, and then a third hits a tree behind Scott, causing him to fall to the ground and lose consciousness. Allison approaches Scott, who tries to apologize to her and tells her he wanted to tell her everything but was afraid for her. Suddenly, Kate appears behind her and sets Derek on fire before going after Scott. Allison tries to stop her, but Kate knocks her to the ground and points the gun at her. At that moment, Chris arrives and tells Kate to drop the gun, saying he knows what she did. Kate says she did what she was told, and Chris responds that no one told her to burn down a house with innocent people and children inside. He tells her to drop the gun or he'll kill her, so Kate drops it. They hear the sound of the door to the house opening, and they all gather in a circle to protect each other from Peter. But Peter, now transformed, emerges and surrounds them, knocking them down one by one until he grabs Kate and drags her into the house. Allison follows, and she finds Kate holding her aunt by the neck, apologizing for what she did to her and her family. Kate tells her she'll let Allison live, and Allison apologizes to her, but Peter kills Kate. He then turns to Allison and goes after her, but Scott and Derek attack him. Allison runs towards her parents' car, but Peter catches up to her. Scott and Derek fight Peter with all their strength, but he knocks them out of the house and grabs Stiles, who throws a Molotov cocktail at him. Peter catches it with his hand, and Scott tells Allison to use the spear. She grabs Scott's arrow and strikes the Molotov cocktail, causing it to explode and burn Peter's entire body. He falls to the ground, still alive but burning. Derek approaches him and sees that he's still alive. Before he can kill him, Scott reminds him they made a deal that he would be the one to kill Peter so he could be cured. Peter taunts Derek, saying he can see in his eyes that he's already decided to kill him. Derek finally kills him, and declares himself the new Alpha. In the end, we see Jackson inside Derek's house, asking him for something he wants. Derek approaches him, bares his fangs, and Jackson smiles, clearly pleased with the answer. Meanwhile, Scott sits with Allison on the roof of the house, both happy and relieved that the ordeal is over. The first season of the Teen Wolf series ends here. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment and press the like button to follow the rest of the seasons. Thank you for watching until the end of the video. Hi, Wolf Recaps here. Today, we will begin the second season of the science fiction and adventure TV series Teen Wolf. I hope you enjoy the video. The episode starts with Jackson emerging from the water after being bitten by Derek. We see Scott running quickly in the forest at night, recalling how Chris Argent had caught him with Allison and threatened to kill him. Here, Allison begged her father to let him go and promise never to see him again, but of course, she couldn't keep that promise. Meanwhile, Stiles is sleeping in the hospital, waiting for Lydia and bringing her a gift. She wakes up and goes to the bathroom, asking her nurse about Stiles, who has been sleeping there since yesterday. The nurse tells her that he sleeps there every day. Allison's mother enters her room and gives her a black dress to wear to her aunt's funeral. Lydia takes a shower but sees that the water is black and finds hair in it. Suddenly, a hand grabs her and she screams. Stiles runs to her with the nurse, but they can't find anyone. They see the window open and hear Lydia screaming on the roof of Allison's house. They call the police, and Officer Stilinski investigates, asking for a description of the attacker. Stiles intervenes and describes Lydia as having blonde hair, green eyes, and being incredibly beautiful. His father confronts him and asks why he's there. Stiles says he's providing moral support and suggests he should go home. Stiles gets into the car and drives with Scott, giving him Lydia's hospital clothes to smell and find her. But before they leave, Allison arrives and tells them that she saw him taking hunters and a jeep to hunt Lydia. They take Allison with them and drive in the direction Scott smells. At that time, Isaac would be digging a grave to prepare for Kate's funeral. But suddenly he hears a noise and sees a werewolf's hand on the grave, but he can't make out what he sees. Suddenly, someone removes the winch and drops it into the grave he was digging, trying to climb out, but he sees the werewolf digging the grave and descends again, scared. But he sees someone lifting the winch again and returning to his place, asking for help, and he finds Derek, which reassures Isaac when he sees him. At the same time, Scott, Stiles, and Allison are at Derek's house, and Stiles asks Scott if he's sure she came here. Scott tells him the scent says so. Stiles asks Allison if she thinks Lydia could have come here before to look for Derek and turned into a werewolf, and she says she doesn't know, but if she did, she wouldn't be alone. Allison asks Scott again if he thinks Lydia came looking for Derek, and he tells her it's possible. She asks him if he has to join the Alpha, or can the werewolf remain alone. Scott tells her that it's better for them to be in groups because that gives them much more speed and strength. Stiles searches for any clue on the ground and finds a wire. He calls out to them, and Allison goes to see for herself. Stiles pulls the wire, and the trap works, catching Scott's legs. Stiles and Allison go to get him down, but Scott hears footsteps and tells them to hide. Chris made the trap and asks Scott what brought him here. He tells him he's looking for Lydia, and Chris reminds him that she's in his group now. He threatens to kill him again if he sees him again and leaves him hanging. Allison and Stiles run to get him down, but he manages to cut the rope with his claws and descends. They start searching for Lydia again. The next morning, we see Officer Stilinski asking Isaac if he had seen Lydia while he was working last night, but he says he didn't. He asks Isaac about the bruise on his eye, and he tells him it's from a sports injury. Officer Stilinski tells him that his son also plays on the same team. Isaac sees Derek standing in the woods and Noah sees him looking at something but not finding anything. He asks him what's up, and Isaac tells him he thought he had practice now and needed to go. Noah asks him one last question. "Do you guys dig up a lot of graves?" Isaac replies, "Not a lot," and Noah asks, "What do you usually take?" Isaac responds with the jewelry that the dead have. Scott tells Stiles that Lydia dug up a grave to eat human liver. Stiles tries to defend her, saying that she's probably just hungry, but Scott tells him that when he turned into a werewolf, he didn't do anything like that. Stiles asks Scott if he can remember what he thought about the most when he transformed, and Scott says he thought about Allison. He then suggests that Lydia is probably thinking about him since she was with him before the accident. Stiles tells him that Lydia left him and is now looking for Jackson. The coach calls them to sign up and help in the search for Lydia. All the boys sign up except for Jackson, who says he doesn't care about what Lydia is doing. He asks Jackson if he will let him know if he hears anything, and Jackson tells him that he's not his dog. As Jackson walks away, he starts bleeding black blood and goes to the bathroom to try to stop it. Derek appears and asks him if he's okay, but Jackson tells him to leave him alone. Meanwhile, Allison hears the girls talking about her crazy aunt who killed everyone and burned down Derek's house. She walks away upset, but Scott tells her to go to the funeral and not worry about anyone else. He assures her that he'll be close by and will watch over her. And indeed, Allison goes to the funeral with her parents, and many reporters try to interview her. One of her schoolmates approaches her and takes a close-up picture of her, but Gerard, Allison's grandfather, arrives and stops the reporter, taking all the pictures he had taken of her. Scott watches over Allison from a distance behind a grave, and Stiles joins him. However, Officer Noah Stalinsky sees them and takes them both in his police car. He receives news that there was an injured person in an ambulance that stopped on the road, with blood everywhere inside the ambulance. Noah tells them to stay put while he checks out the situation. He tries to contact Scott and Stiles, but they have already left the car to go to the scene of the accident. Stiles asks him why he didn't act like that when he turned into a werewolf, and Scott tells him that he thought about Allison the most. But he sees a hallucination of someone running and leading him to the transformed Jackson. Scott manages to catch him, but another transformed creature appears, not Lydia. Lydia emerges from the woods and sees Stiles and his father at the ambulance. She asks them for help. Scott is still trying to catch the creature when he falls into a trap set by Chris's men. Just before Chris arrives, Derek appears and rescues Scott. Chris asks Gerard why he killed the creature before they could determine if it had killed anyone. But Gerard tells him that they no longer follow that rule and that anyone who is a threat to them must be killed. Finally, we see Jackson lying in his bed still bleeding black blood, unable to stop it or understand what is happening to him. After that, Isaac having dinner with his parents. His dad asks him about his grades in various subjects. Isaac tells him that he did well in economics and math, but tries to avoid answering about chemistry. His dad presses him until Isaac admits that he got a passing grade. As punishment, his dad orders him to clean the entire kitchen, but then starts throwing dishes on the floor and hitting Isaac with broken glass. Isaac tells his dad that he could have hurt his eye, but his dad brushes it off as a minor injury. Isaac runs out and gets on his bike, but his dad follows him in his car and sees Jackson. It starts to rain and his dad finds Isaac's bike on the side of the road, so he gets out to look for him. Meanwhile, Chris is waiting for the school principal and takes him in his car. Allison's mom tells the principal that his performance evaluation is very low and that parents don't think he's suitable for the school principal position. They start to torture him. Isaac goes to look for Derek in the woods and tells him that his dad was killed. Derek asks him if he did it, but Isaac says no. The next day, Scott is training with Stiles and tells him that he doesn't feel the need to be transformed like he did during the last full moon. Stiles tells him that he might not feel it now, but he will when it's time. Scott asks him what he brought for him this time, and Stiles opens his closet, causing a large amount of chains to fall out. Scott senses something and tells Stiles that there's another werewolf in the area like him. Meanwhile, Lydia is returning to school and Allison asks her how she's feeling. Lydia says she's fine and doesn't remember anything from the past few days when she was missing. Scott goes to the field and Stiles asks him if he could recognize the culprit if he saw them face to face. Scott says yes, and Stiles gets the coach to make Scott the goalkeeper. As they play, Scott comes face to face with Isaac, the new werewolf. Isaac asks Scott not to tell anyone, but suddenly Officer Stalinsky enters and arrests Isaac for the murder of his father. Scott tells Stiles that Isaac is the werewolf he sensed, and asks why Derek chose him. Stiles explains that Peter's bite would have killed Isaac if he hadn't been turned, and that teenagers have a higher chance of surviving. Stiles searches for Jackson but can't find him, so he asks Danny where he is. Danny tells him that Jackson is being questioned by the police because he lives near Isaac's house. Stiles tells Scott they need to go to the police station and ask Danny how he knows, and Scott senses that there's something wrong. They wait outside the principal's office and listen to Jackson tell the officer that Isaac's father used to hit him every day. The officer asks Jackson why he didn't tell anyone, but Jackson responds selfishly and says it's not his problem. Officer Stilinski comes out and hides Stiles and Scott behind a magazine as Isaac's father walks by, not saying anything to him. Suddenly, Gerard, Allison's grandfather, appears and introduces himself as the new school principal. He asks Scott and Stiles about their grades and athletic abilities, saying that he doesn't want to be enemies with them. Meanwhile, Lydia tries to thank Jackson for taking her to the hospital, but he warns her to stay in her room that night because it's the full moon. Scott goes to see Isaac but finds that the police have already arrested him. Before returning to school, Derek arrives and asks Scott to help him find a solution for Isaac's problem, as he's innocent. Scott and Derek go to Isaac's house and Derek tries to convince Scott to stay on his team, as he has no chance of survival alone. Scott refuses, however, as he doesn't want to sacrifice his relationship with the Argents. He tells Derek that the only thing he can do now is help Isaac prove his innocence. We see Jackson recording himself on camera to capture his transformation when the moon is full. The officer's car that is heading to Isaac's house stops and the officer finds his car's tire punctured by multiple arrows. Allison appears and shoots an arrow at his leg to disable him, allowing Stiles to go to the police station before him. Stiles is informed by Allison and asks where Scott is. He tells her that he's at Isaac's house and she asks what they should do with him before the full moon. Stiles explains the plan they had prepared and Allison takes the iron bag and goes to Scott, asking him if he's sure he wants her to tie him up. Scott confirms, and she asks where, and he points to the iron box that Isaac was tied up in before. Allison ties him up with the iron chains and locks him in the box. Stiles and Derek arrive in front of the police station and Stiles tells Derek that his father keeps the keys to the station in his desk, which is locked with a password that he knows. They need to distract the officer at the information desk so Stiles can go and get the keys to release Isaac. Derek goes in and distracts the officer while Stiles goes to the desk, but he can't find the keys. Stiles leaves the office and sees the hunter, who is dressed as an officer and heading to the cell with a needle to kill Isaac. Stiles recognizes him and tries to escape, but he is caught. At the same time, Allison sees a strange creature and screams, which Scott hears and tries to break out of the box. Stiles manages to activate the alarm, which alerts the hunter. He takes Stiles and goes to the cell, but they find it open and Isaac is not there. Suddenly, Isaac appears and attacks the hunter, looking for Stiles, but Derek intervenes and stops him. Isaac returns to his normal form, and Stiles asks how Derek did it, to which he responds that he's the Alpha. Scott manages to open the box and goes to save Allison, but he doesn't find anything happen to Jackson. He realizes that he fell asleep and nothing happened to him. The first part of Season 2 of Teen Wolf ends here. Subscribe to the channel to follow the rest of the season, and click the like button if you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching.
Hi, Wulf Recap here. Today, we will continue with another part of the second season of the TV series Teen Wolf. I hope you'll hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more enjoyable episodes of the series. We see Allison as she's heading to fill up her car with gasoline. She notices a guy leaving the gas station, getting on his motorcycle. But before he leaves, he looks at her in a strange way, as if he knows her. As soon as he drives away, all the lights at the gas station go out. This scares Allison, and she gets in her car, but she can't find her keys. She gets out again to look for them, but she hears the sound of the keys moving from a distance. Suddenly, someone comes from behind her, puts a black bag over her head, and kidnaps her. Allison wakes up in a strange place, tied to a chair. In front of her is Chris, her father, in the same situation. They hear a voice in the room explaining to them about the shifters and what to do if the hunter himself gets bitten. Chris then tells Allison that their family's purpose is to become leaders, and today marks the beginning of her training. He hands her a small arrow while her hands are still tied, activates the timer, and leaves. After some time, Allison manages to free herself and finds herself alone in a strange place. She is sitting in a chair, feeling bewildered. Meanwhile, the hunter who is with her father waits for her and congratulates her when she arrives. She asks him why it took her so long, and he reveals that it took him 3 hours the first time. Allison gets into her car, feeling satisfied and realizing that she indeed possesses an advantage. The next day at school, Allison and Scott participate in a climbing exercise. Allison beats Scott to the top and mocks him. The coach laughs and calls the next competitors. Styles goes out with Erica, and he manages to climb quickly and descend. But Erica has acrophobia, and she clings to the wall, unable to climb up or down again. The coach is surprised by her condition as she had never shown such behavior before. He tries to help her, but as she walks, Scott senses something strange. However, Erica decides to climb back on her own. At that moment, the coach announces that anyone who sees Isaac should inform the principal. At the same time, Erica begins to convulse while on the wall, and Scott notices her trembling arm. He rushes to the training area, reaching Erica just as she falls. Allison approaches them, and Scott asks her how she knew Erica was here. She tells him that she felt it, and then Erica is taken to the hospital by Scott's mom. At the hospital, Mama McCall checks Erica's condition and tells Allison that the doctors are coming. She also asks Allison to stay and make sure everything is okay. Derek enters and takes Erica to an examination room, where he asks her how she's feeling when her seizures began. She tells him about the blood and how they took pictures of it. Derek offers to help her get rid of her symptoms. The next day, Jackson is in biology class, and he notices something unusual about immunity. He realizes that if someone gets bitten by something, they develop immunity to it. He thinks this might be the reason he didn't transform. He goes to Lydia after class and questions her about how she transferred her immunity to him. Lydia is upset and goes into the bathroom to cry. However, she sees two legs under the stall and thinks it's Peter. She opens the door but finds no one. She leaves the bathroom, confused, and finds Peter standing near the trophy case. She accuses him of being Peter, and he doesn't deny it. At the same time, Styles visits Boyd's house and calls him, but no one answers. Erica appears and asks Styles what he wants from Boyd. Styles replies that he just wants to talk to him, but Erica slaps him and throws him in a trash can. Dr. Deaton hears the alarm at his clinic and rushes to see what's going on. He finds Chris holding the dead hunter's body and asks what happened. Chris tells him he's a veterinarian, but Chris doesn't believe him, saying he knows he's not just a vet. Allison is in the school cafeteria, and Scott approaches her, telling her he knows she talked to Boyd. Allison explains that she's not angry with him, but she's worried about him and what's happening around him. That's when Styles joins them, and they discuss the situation. They realize that Boyd, Erica, and Isaac may join Derek, and they need to find them before Derek turns them into full-fledged werewolves. Scott is standing in the skating rink, talking to Boyd, and trying to convince him not to listen to Derek. He tells Boyd that Derek won't treat him better than Scott, but Boyd disagrees. He believes Derek is the right alpha for him. Here, Derek enters with Erica and Isaac and says to Scott, "Isn't it rude to talk about me like this?" Scott gets defensive and greets Derek, trying to stand his ground. Derek goes on to tell them that he's transforming them for his benefit because they increase his strength, and that they are just guard dogs for him. At this point, Derek transforms and attacks Scott, easily overpowering him and injuring him on his side. He then takes Erica and Isaac with him and leaves. Boyd goes to check on Scott and asks him if, after witnessing what happened, he still wants to be like Isaac and Erica. But Boyd tells him that no, he wants to be like Scott, and he wants the bite that Derek gave to him. Scott goes to the clinic, but the wound isn't healing like normal wounds. He asks Dr. Deaton why the wound isn't healing like all the other wounds, and Deaton explains that it's because of the alpha. In the end, we see Jackson practicing throwing a ball, and after he finishes, he gets in his car to leave. However, the car won't start, and Jackson tries to force it, but it doesn't work. Suddenly, Jackson lifts the entire car effortlessly, realizing that Derek's bite has turned him into something like them, granting him the extraordinary strength he had always dreamed of. Scott appears in the veterinary clinic, and Dr. Deaton cleans his wound. He assures Scott not to worry, it will heal, but not as quickly. Scott asks how he knows these things, and Deaton replies that it's a long story. Deaton explains that he specializes in werewolves, but what killed the hunter is something entirely different. The Argents are searching for it, and they won't stop until they figure out what this creature is. The doctor mentions that they have a book where they record information about the creatures they hunt. Suddenly, they hear someone entering, so Scott hides. They see Chris and Gerard coming into the clinic, and Gerard greets Dr. Deaton, asking how he's been since they last met. They inquire if he's made any progress after examining the hunter's body. He explains that the predator paralyzes its prey first by making a wound in the neck and then kills it. However, the unique aspect is that it doesn't collect venom to immobilize its prey, unlike other predators. It kills simply for the sake of killing. Meanwhile, Styles is at the auto repair shop, fixing his car. When he opens the door, he finds a strange sticky substance on his hand. As soon as he picks up his phone, he feels his hands trembling. losing control over them. He notices the creature's hand on top of his car in the workshop and tries to call for help, but he can't. The paralyzing effect begins to take over his entire body. The creature injures the mechanic's neck, just like it did to the hunter, and the mechanic falls to the ground, unable to move. The creature disconnects the cable holding the car and starts to lower it onto the immobilized mechanic. Stiles desperately tries to call for help, but his hands won't cooperate. However, the creature eventually leaves, and Stiles manages to call for help. Meanwhile, Allison gets into her car to meet Scott, but Gerard intercepts her and asks to talk for a bit. He pulls out a medication from his pocket, dropping an old-looking book in the process. Allison retrieves it, and Gerard thanks her, saying that this book is very important to him. He talks about trust, saying that humans can only trust their family because anyone else might betray them. Allison agrees, and Gerard asks if he can trust her, to which she replies affirmatively. We see Stiles sitting with his father after the police arrive, explaining what happened but not mentioning the creature he saw. His father tells him that they need to impound his car as evidence, so he won't have it for a while. Lydia's mother wakes her up to go to her appointment with the school counselor. When she lifts the covers, she finds herself covered in blood. She sees her injured hand in the shattered mirror, realizing what happened. She arrives at the school counselor's office wearing gloves to hide her injuries. At the same time, Stiles talks to Scott about how Dr. Deaton told him that the Argents have a book where they record information about supernatural creatures. Scott is relieved that Gerard didn't find out about it. Lydia is seen with the school counselor, inquiring about her qualifications and making sure she can trust her. The counselor mentions her extensive education and experience. Danny checks the camera for Jackson, confirming that there was indeed tampering with the photos, and 2 hours of footage are missing. The lacrosse game begins, and Scott's team is at a significant size disadvantage compared to the opposing team. They keep getting injured, and Jackson tells Scott to take action. But Scott can't because Allison is there. Allison notices that she's cold, so Jackson lends her his jacket. She takes this opportunity to grab the keys from his jacket pocket and gives them to Stiles. Stiles, now in the office, searches for the book but doesn't find anything. He sends a message to Allison, telling her that the office is empty. However, before he can leave, Erica enters the room. During the game, Boyd can use his strength to overpower the opposing team. Erica takes Stiles and goes to the swimming pool area to meet Derek, who asks him what happened in the garage. At the same time, Scott attempts to get Boyd off the field because his eyes are glowing, which could attract attention. However, Boyd refuses and continues playing. The opposing team aggressively targets Scott and lands a hard hit on him, causing him to fall to the ground. Allison rushes to Scott and informs him that his leg is broken. Scott tries to downplay it, but his mother and the coach overhear them discussing the broken leg, wondering how they didn't hear the sound of a bone breaking. Lydia asks her grandfather if she can leave, but he insists on speaking to Scott one last time. Meanwhile, the transformed creature, unable to swim, is still in the pool area. The situation becomes more complicated when the creature attacks Erica and scratches Derek's neck, immobilizing him. Stiles decides to save Derek. Derek asks Stiles if he can see the creature, but Stiles replies that he can't and suggests that it may have left. At Lydia's house, she asks her parents if she can go out with Scott to give him some notes. Her father, Chris, refuses, but her grandfather, Gerard, agrees. Scott goes out with Allison and joins her family for dinner. Gerard attempts to facilitate communication and understanding among them, suggesting they start anew and learn to get along. In the meantime, Derek and Stiles are still in the water, with Derek unable to swim or move. Stiles tells him not to drown, and Derek reveals that he's paralyzed and can't move. Chris asks Scott to go with him to get dessert. When they enter the kitchen, Chris grabs Scott and asks what he would do if he knew the truth. Scott assures him that he won't reveal anything. Chris warns Scott about the consequences if he does. Back in the pool area, the creature continues to surround them but appears to be afraid of the water and unable to descend. At Allison's house, she asks her father if she can leave with Scott to give him some notes. Chris refuses, but her grandfather, Gerard, agrees. Scott leaves the dinner table and Scott goes out with Allison and accompanies her to her grandfather's room. They find a safe, and Scott opens it, but instead of the book, they find a cookbook. Stiles and Derek are still in the water, and calls Stiles to ask for the keys that Allison took. He mentions that the keys contain a flash drive with a compendium of information about supernatural creatures. Scott enters the school and finds the keys still by the door. He calls Stiles to inform him but is suddenly inside Gerard's room and quickly hangs up, realizing the situation. Stiles drops his phone into the water while trying to retrieve Derek. Stiles decides to rest with Derek paralyzed and unable to move. Stiles tells Derek that he can't handle more of this, to which Derek replies that he knows what the creature is. Stiles asks why Derek didn't tell them earlier, and Derek says that he wasn't sure until he saw it in the mirror. Derek explains that the creature is called the Kanima, a very malevolent being that kills for the sake of killing and must be eliminated. In the end, Scott leaves to pick up his mother from work, but as he exits the car, Allison's grandfather, Gerard, attacks him with a knife, accusing him of deception and threatening dire consequences if he doesn't stay away from Allison. Jackson's appearance as he trains with weights much heavier than he used to lift, attempting to discover his new abilities. Danny enters and offers to help, but Jackson insists he doesn't need assistance. Danny mentions that he's just checking on him, concerned that lifting heavy weights might harm him. Danny leaves, and Jackson continues his training, feeling a presence in the training room. Erica appears and takes him with her to meet Derek. Derek asks Jackson what happened to him on the night of the full moon, but Jackson denies anything significant occurred. Derek remains skeptical, prompting Jackson to mention that he recorded today's events on camera to prove himself. Derek claims he has another way to prove it and drinks a drop of snake venom to observe its effects. Jackson falls to the ground and feels somewhat paralyzed but doesn't transform or change further. Derek tells Jackson that despite being selfish and acting like a jerk, he's not the one he's searching for. Before leaving, Derek asks Jackson for a favor. The next day, Jackson goes to the police station and changes his previous statement about Isaac and his father, which had led Officer Noahu to accuse Isaac of murdering his father. Stiles rushes to Scott during class to tell him important news. He overheard Scott's father talking about Isaac's innocence that morning. Stiles presses Scott to confront Jackson about it, but Scott says he doesn't know him. Stiles insists, saying it's important, and Scott reluctantly agrees. Isaac returns to school and joins their class. Afterwards, Jackson rushes into the classroom, asking Scott and Stiles about the Kanima. Scott tells him that he heard from Erica and Isaac, but Stiles defends Lydia, insisting she couldn't be the Kanima. Jackson reveals that he saw the Kanima and looked into its eyes, certain it's not Lydia. Meanwhile, Lydia continues to experience hallucinations and sees Peter standing at a chalkboard, writing in an unknown language. She confronts him, but Peter erases everything and leaves. Scott asks Derek if he's not going to kill Lydia, but he wants to confirm whether she is the Kanima first. They spot Erica and Isaac entering their classroom, so Scott and Stiles sit next to Lydia to protect her from them. However, the teacher separates them into different groups. The teacher selects Scott and Erica for one group, and he tries to talk to Derek privately, believing Lydia is not the Kanima. The teacher gives Lydia the experiment and watches her, but she doesn't react to the snake venom or change in any way. Scott, Stiles, and Allison meet after class to figure out their plan. Scott suggests they need to prove that Lydia isn't the Kanima before Derek kills her. Allison mentions trying to find something in her grandfather's book, but Stiles says it's in an unknown language, and they can't decipher it. During Lydia's counseling session, she describes seeing everything as a butterfly, even the wolf. The counselor encourages her to be more straightforward to help her. Danny asks Jackson who he thinks could enter his house at any time. Lydia then enters the room with Stiles, and Jackson suspects Lydia was the one who broke into his house and altered the video. At this point, Allison takes a picture of the Kanima from her grandfather's book, and she goes to the school counselor to get it translated. The counselor is able to understand the language in the paper, and she tells Allison that it's written in ancient Romanian. She asks Allison to leave the paper with her, but Allison insists on having it translated right away. She informs Allison that it contains information about a creature that used to transform into a small animal in its youth, feeling loneliness and seeking a friend. Scott tries to talk to Derek, but Boyd stops him, and Derek comes out to speak with him. Scott attempts to convince Derek that there is no evidence that Lydia is the Kanima just because the venom didn't work on her. However, Derek remains determined that she is the Kanima. Stiles, Allison, and Jackson then take Lydia out of school and head to Stiles' house. When they enter, Stiles locks the door and secures it with a chair, which surprises Lydia. Stiles tells her that there have been numerous break-ins in the area, explaining his actions. Jackson accompanies Lydia to Stiles' room and asks her about his house key. Lydia tells him that she hasn't returned it yet, and Jackson questions her, accusing her of intentionally preventing him from seeing the changes that have occurred to him. Lydia claims she doesn't understand him but hands him the key anyway. Jackson notices a bead of sweat on Lydia's forehead and hears her heart rate increase, realizing that she's lying. He confronts her, questioning why she came to his house while he was asleep and altered the 2 hours of his video. He believes she did it to prevent him from seeing the changes that have occurred to him. Meanwhile, Scott returns to school, but the coach calls him and asks about some equipment that Danny was wearing during practice that got damaged. Scott tries to question Danny about how it happened, but Danny insists that it wasn't him. He reminds Scott that they swapped roles during the game, with Scott as the goalkeeper. Danny is still waiting for the video to be repaired so he can watch it. During this time, Allison calls Scott and urgently asks him to go to Styles' house. Scott rushes there, and just as the video begins to play, they see that Jackson woke up from sleep and sat on the bed with his eyes glowing similar to the Kanema's eyes. Meanwhile, Styles and Allison are on the ground floor of Styles' house, keeping an eye on Derek and his team. Styles is worried that they're within the archery range and might shoot at them with her arrow. However, Allison points out that there are only 3 of them. They look out the window and indeed see 3 individuals. Isaac is missing from the group. Styles wonders how they can be 3 when there were 4 earlier. Through the window, they see Isaac locked outside the house, and he's unable to enter. Lydia then approaches Allison and tells her to go back and take care of herself. She goes back to the room but doesn't find Jackson there, and the window is open. Lydia calls the police. Erica enters the house and attacks Allison, who retaliates with her arrow, but Erica grabs it. She falls to the ground after touching the arrow with the snake venom that paralyzes them. Derek thinks they've succeeded in dealing with Lydia, but then he notices the door opening, and Isaac and Erica are thrown out of the house. Scott returns at that moment. In the end, Derek tells Scott that he now understands why he refused to join his pack. He realizes that while he may be the leader of the pack, he doesn't possess the same strength as Scott. They spot the Kanema walking on the roof of the house and see Lydia running out of the house to inform them about what's happening. They discover that Jackson is the Kanema. Jackson runs into the street, places his hand on a car window from the outside, and we see a hand that resembles his on the inside of the glass. The car drives away, and Jackson enters the forest. The missing part from Jackson's video reappears after Danny manages to recover it. He sends Jackson a message that he has fixed the video and leaves his tablet in his car before leaving. At that time, Derek is chasing after Jackson after he escaped from Styles' house. Allison arrives at Lydia's house and tells her to promise that no one will know what happened today. However, Lydia insists that she can promise but wants to understand what actually happened. She expresses her confusion about the strange events at Styles' house and questions why they all acted strangely, including Erica and Isaac. Lydia asks Allison if she knows what was going on, but Allison can't explain it. She mentions that her father forbade her from seeing Scott, and if he finds out they met yesterday, he will punish her. Lydia promises not to reveal that she and Scott met. Scott can smell Derek's location and communicates with Styles, who leaves the car to search for them. Derek and Jackson engage in a physical fight, but Jackson's strength is formidable, and he can defend himself effectively. Chris Argent arrives and tries to stop Jackson by using fire. Jackson falls to the ground, but he quickly rises again, and Chris fires more rounds, but they run out. Jackson attacks Chris, who falls to the ground, and Gerard, Jackson's father, stands nearby watching. Scott arrives and saves Chris from Jackson, who then escapes. Scott returns to Styles, and Styles asks him where Jackson went. Scott says he doesn't know, he lost track of him. Styles then sees Jackson emerging from a nightclub. He questions why Jackson would want to go into a nightclub and what he plans to do there. Scott, observing Jackson from a distance, can't pick up his scent, but Styles tells Scott to try to find Danny, who is standing nearby. Scott approaches Danny but is unable to get any information from him. The club becomes chaotic as people panic and flee. Scott and Styles notice bloodstains. Jackson eventually reverts to his human form, lying on the ground and seemingly unaware of his surroundings. Scott asks Styles what they should do now, and Styles suggests they get Jackson out of there. An ambulance arrives to attend to the injured, including Danny and his friends. Scott tries to obtain information from Danny, but Danny remains silent. Styles gets in the car with Jackson, and they drive away from the scene. However, Jackson is angry and tells Styles that he will report him and Scott for kidnapping him. Styles manages to hide Jackson in a police car of the same make and model, successfully evading detection. Meanwhile, Chris Argent, Gerard, and others are discussing the events. Chris mentions that it was his first time seeing Derek since Kate's death, and he is puzzled about Derek's actions. He questions what Derek intended to achieve by acting that way. Chris decides to take the responsibility of handling the situation, and Gerard suggests he finds another way to get the information he seeks. Gerard is interested in the truth and hints at his involvement. As Styles and Scott drive away with Jackson hidden in the police car, Styles receives a call from Jackson's father, who has reported Jackson missing to the police. At the same time, Styles and Scott are still driving and remain unaware of the police presence. Styles thinks that they have successfully concealed Jackson's whereabouts. The next day, Scott and Styles are walking together, wondering what to do next. Stiles mentions that Jackson may have been trying to send a message when he turned into a kanama. Scott asks Stiles if he knows where Jackson is, but Stiles doesn't have a clear answer. He is worried about their current predicament and is unsure of how to proceed. Suddenly, they see a police car passing by, and Stiles realizes that their situation is more precarious than they thought. They continue to discuss their options and what to do about Jackson, who is still hidden in the police car. He asks her again after he checks her pulse so that he can tell if she's lying or not. Asks her, "What's your connection to all of this?" Allison initially gets defensive and says, "No," but then corrects herself and says, "I don't know." He tells her that her heart rate went up, and she says it's because he's scaring her. He apologizes, saying that he shouldn't have treated her that way and asks her to go back to her class. Allison leaves the room and finds them installing surveillance cameras in the school. Meanwhile, Stiles is sitting with Jackson, telling him everything that happened, but Jackson can't remember anything except that he doesn't believe any of it. Stiles mentions that Jackson was going to kill Danny, and Jackson asks why he would want to do that when Danny is his closest friend. Scott tries to understand the reasons for all this. However, Jackson just tells them they should get a lawyer because he's not going to stay with them after he leaves here. We see Allison at school coming out of the class her mother is teaching. Before she leaves, her mother asks her why there are so many calls between her and Stiles. Allison replies that Stiles is Lydia's friend, and they told her to keep an eye on him. Her mother comments that she sees Allison trying not to look at Scott. She praises Allison for being strong and not like other girls at school who are only concerned about getting invited to a graduation party. Allison responds, "Well, being strong won't stop me from going to the graduation party." Her mother advises her to be strong but to go with someone other than Scott, reminding her that her strength is the only thing that has kept her alive so far. Allison goes to Stiles in the woods and tells him that Jackson's parents have informed the police. Stiles is surprised because he sent them a message from Jackson's phone yesterday, saying he was staying with a friend. But Allison says that her grandfather told her that the police were notified in the morning. Stiles turns on the radio and hears that the police are heading to the woods. Jackson makes a call from his phone to his parents and throws it away. He then runs to the car with Allison, and they drive off. Meanwhile, Scott is with Danny in the hospital, trying to understand if there's any issue between Jackson and him that would make Jackson want to kill him. Danny reassures Scott that their relationship has always been good, especially since Danny has been helping him out recently. Scott asks Danny about the favor he mentioned earlier, but Danny initially refuses to say anything, claiming it's a secret. However, Scott manages to press Danny, who eventually reveals that he will make a fake ID for Scott, making him older, so he can get into the nightclub again. Scott then rushes to find Stiles, as he needs to retrieve the tablet with the video they recorded. However, Scott's mother confronts him about his low grades and how he may have to repeat the year. Scott assures her that he will study with Stiles to improve his grades. Scott arrives at the car where Danny's tablet is supposed to be, but someone else has already taken it. He listens to a conversation between Stiles, Allison, and Jackson on his phone, where they discuss what's happening with Jackson and the mysterious person trying to protect him. Scott wonders who could be behind all this and why they are trying to protect Jackson. He is puzzled by the situation and the lack of clear answers. He realizes that Jackson is listening to their conversation as his hand undergoes a transformation. Scott tells Allison that he remembers the day when he was going to kill her and Jackson. He had something to stop him and protect him from himself. He urges them to try to save Jackson while they still can. They rush to Stiles, who informs them that they need to see what's happening. Jackson has escaped from the car. Allison says they need to inform her dad so he can take action before Jackson kills someone else. Stiles agrees, saying that he also needs to inform his dad. Allison asks Stiles if he thinks her dad will believe him, and Scott reassures her, saying, "He'll definitely believe me." Allison returns home and finds Lydia waiting for her. She tells Lydia that she's not feeling well today and won't be able to stay with her. But Lydia insists, saying she needs to talk to someone and can't find anyone else to listen to her. Here, Allison tells Lydia that not everything a person desires happens instantly, recounting her own frustration in trying to translate some old Roman papers and not finding anyone to help her. Lydia surprises her by saying she knows ancient Roman and offers to help translate the papers. Meanwhile, Scott and Stiles have arrived at the police station and entered Stiles' dad's office, only to find Jackson and his dad there. In the end, Lydia manages to translate the paper for Allison, revealing that the kanama isn't looking for a friend, it's looking for a master, meaning someone is controlling Jackson, not protecting him. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support us in completing the episodes. The episode begins with Billy and his sister catching glowing butterflies in the forest. Billy traps a butterfly in a jar, but his sister tells him that it needs holes or the butterfly will die. Billy goes off to gather more, but suddenly, he sees Boyd, who has transformed after escaping from Derek and Scott. Billy and his sister run through the forest and find a house to hide in, but Boyd arrives and lifts the entire house off them. They scream, and the girl drops the jar of butterflies, which fly out and distract Boyd, allowing Billy and his sister to escape. At the same time, we see Lydia waking up from a nightmare, screaming and looking for a sedative, but she finds it's all gone. She tells her mother that she's going out to buy something. We see Lydia getting out of her car, but she finds herself at a swimming pool instead of the supermarket she was heading to. Lydia notices a body in the water, approaches to see what it is, but it turns out to be a human-shaped float. Just as she turns to leave, she sees the lifeguard murdered, sitting in his chair. At the same time, Allison is recalling Scott telling her that her mother had tried to kill him. She asks him why he didn't tell her before, and Scott explains that he didn't want her memories of her mother to change, which is why he kept it from her. We see two girls, Caitlin and Emily, camping in the forest together. Emily finds insects in the tent and screams, running out. Caitlin goes out to search for her but can't see her in the dark. Emily is on the ground with many insects crawling over her. Caitlin continues searching for Emily in the forest and encounters Derek's sister, Cora, in a transformed state, who attacks her. Isaac arrives to save Caitlin and fights Cora. Scott arrives just in time and tells Caitlin to run away. Meanwhile, Stiles has arrived to meet Lydia after she called him about the body she found. He takes out his phone to call the police, but Lydia tells him she already did. Stiles responds that she should have called him first before the police. Stiles calls Scott to inform him about the body they found. Scott asks him to check if the lifeguard was killed in a way that suggests it was done by a supernatural being or otherwise. Derek asks Scott how they managed to get across the forest so quickly. Scott realizes that the situation is different from what they initially thought and that they need help from someone with more experience. Officer Noah is questioning Caitlin, who describes the transformed beings and how her friend went missing. The officer tells his assistant to issue a bulletin with Emily's description. The assistant is skeptical, suggesting that Caitlin might be on something, but Officer Noah insists that she saw something real. Chris arrives to meet Scott after Scott called him. Derek and Isaac are sitting in the car, watching the interaction between Chris and Scott. Scott asks Chris for his help, but Chris refuses, stating that he saw his father brainwashing his daughter and how he was turning her into a criminal. Chris wants to stay away from this life for his daughter's sake. Scott argues that people are dying and that Chris is the only one who knows how to hunt the supernatural beings and must help them. Chris remains firm in his refusal. Scott then asks Chris to at least drive him to the forest before leaving. Chris agrees and drives him. Upon arriving, Scott sees Caitlin being taken to the hospital by ambulance and feels responsible. He asks Chris if Boyd and Cora were responsible for the attack. Scott confirms, and Chris finally agrees to help them. Chris goes with Scott, Derek, and Isaac to the location where the transformed beings were last seen. He tells them that following their trail from the last known spot is a mistake because the tracks can overlap and create confusion. The key to hunting the transformed is to rely on their enhanced sense of smell. Meanwhile, Allison cuts her hand to let a drop of blood fall, hoping Boyd will smell it and come to her. Chris asks Derek when he last saw his sister. Derek replies that it was 9 years ago, during the fire. Chris then asks if he can recognize her scent, but Derek says it's difficult. Chris explains that Boyd and Cora kill for pleasure, not hunger, which is problematic because they won't stop killing. He thinks about a place that is enclosed and has no windows or glass where they can trap them. Scott suggests the school, which is empty at night, and mentions that the storage room for school supplies has no windows. If they can get Boyd and Cora there, they might be able to trap them. However, the school is still operational at this time. Chris pulls out some devices, explaining that they emit ultrasonic waves that only the transformed can hear, which can be used to guide them to the desired location. He hands out 2 devices to each of them, and they begin distributing them throughout the forest. At the same time, Stiles takes Lydia home, and she tells him that she knows he wants to ask her something. Stiles asks why she ended up at the pool. Lydia replies that she doesn't know. Stiles asks if she remembers the last time something like this happened, and Lydia says yes, it was because of Peter. We see Peter talking to Derek, informing him that Deucalion, the Alpha Pack leader, wants Derek to kill his sister Cora and his team to join him. Peter suggests letting Scott handle the situation while they watch from afar. Stiles goes to the hospital to see Melissa, Scott's mother. She tells him she wants to show him something but not to tell anyone she let him in. She shows him the lifeguard's body, noting that he was killed in multiple ways, strangled and hit on the head, indicating human methods, not those of the transformed. She also mentions that a girl was killed in the same way, which is even more unusual. Scott and Isaac open the school doors, and Chris notices the glowing butterflies, commenting to Scott that something strange is happening because those butterflies are not native to their area. They hear Boyd and Cora but see them running across the roof instead of entering as planned. Melissa shows Stiles the second body, which turns out to be his missing friend Heather, who disappeared on her birthday. Stiles is deeply affected, and Melissa asks if he knew her. He explains that their mothers were friends and that he was with Heather the day she disappeared. Melissa tells him he needs to inform his father because he is now a witness. Stiles starts thinking about the recent murders and asks Melissa if there are any other cases. She tells him about the girl from the forest whose friend is still missing, and Stiles requests to meet her. Back at the school, Chris says they need to open the door to let Boyd and Cora in. Isaac suggests that he can run quickly to lure them inside and shut the door behind them. Isaac positions himself by the door, and as Boyd and Cora approach, Allison stands on top of the bus, shooting arrows to drive them inside. Once they enter, Isaac shuts the door behind them. Using the ultrasonic devices, they lure Boyd and Cora into the storage room and lock them inside. However, as they start to calm down, Scott hears 3 heartbeats instead of 2, realizing there is a third person in the storage room. Stiles meets Caitlin and asks about what happened to her and Emily. Caitlin explains that she camps there often and nothing like this has ever happened before. Derek decides to enter the school to save it from Boyd and Cora. He tells Scott to lock the door behind him once he's inside. The school hears the sounds of the transformed beings, and Derek confronts them in a fierce battle. Isaac sees the sun rising and shouts to Scott. They open the door to find Derek severely injured with Boyd and Cora lying on the ground. Derek tells them there's a student inside, and he goes to get her out. Scott goes to the hospital to meet Stiles, who explains what he has discovered. Stiles is certain they will find Emily killed in the same manner. Officer Noah finds Emily's body in the forest, killed in the same way as Heather and the lifeguard. Stiles tells Scott about a ritual performed by monks in a strange religion, requiring specific human sacrifices to gain desired abilities. These sacrifices involve 3 specific methods of killing, which matches the pattern of the murders they have found. A man is getting his dog treated by Dr. Deaton. Scott takes a sample from the dog for analysis, and after finishing, the man takes his dog outside to his car. However, the dog runs off into a side street. Scott is analyzing the sample and finds pollen. He asks Dr. Deaton about it, and Deaton explains that it's something potent enough to kill not just dogs but humans as well. The dog's owner searches for his pet and hears a noise under a trash can. As he investigates, he gets bitten. He assumes it was his dog, but then he sees the dog standing at a distance. When he checks again, he hears a voice calling him closer, and unfortunately, he disappears. Scott exits the clinic and finds the dog alone, searching for its owner, but he is nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, Derek visits the teacher Jennifer, who is frightened and asks if he's there to kill her. She grabs a stick to defend herself, but Derek assures her he's there to check on her well-being. As he leaves, she calls out, asking who he is. He replies, "Derek," and she introduces herself as Jennifer. The next day, Isaac arrives at school late and prepares for practice. He feels uneasy around the twin brothers and mentions this to Scott. During the run, Isaac tells Scott that the twins are the ones who attacked him. Isaac chases after them but loses sight of them, and when he stops, the twins appear and beat him up. Scott intervenes, helping Isaac fight them off. They hear students screaming and rush to see what happened, finding the dog owner dead and tied to a tree. Officer Noah arrives to investigate the crime. Scott sees the twins and asserts they were surprised by the body like everyone else, but Isaac remains suspicious, insisting they killed the girl who saved him. At Derek's house, Cora is training with him when the red light warning activates, signaling the arrival of the Alpha Pack. Kali, a member of the Alpha Pack, enters and fights Derek, impaling him with a metal rod to pin him down. Meanwhile, at school, Allison is in her French class, dozing off. The teacher, who is also the school counselor, wakes her up and suggests she might need a session at the counseling office. Allison retorts, asking what she was doing at the bank, and the teacher says she has an appointment after school. In chemistry class, Scott and Isaac discuss giving the twins a chance to reveal their intentions. Isaac disagrees and asks the teacher to go to the restroom, but Scott's request to leave is denied. Isaac witnesses one twin brutally beating the other and throwing him at Isaac's feet. The teacher hears the noise and exits to find Isaac, assuming he was the one who attacked the twin. Derek, still pinned by Kali, listens as do Kali and apologizes for what happened to him. Stiles goes to the station to talk to his father, Trying to get more information about the boy found in the forest to confirm his theory about ritual sacrifices. Cora asks Kali if she plans to kill Derek, but Kali says no. Derek asks Deucalion if he wants him to kill one of his pack members, but Deucalion replies that he wants Derek to kill them all. The chemistry teacher assigns Isaac and Allison to organize the storage room as part of their detention. Allison asks Isaac if he told anyone she was involved in trapping Boyd and Cora, and he assures her he didn't. She apologizes for previously shooting him with her arrows. Suddenly, the door shuts on Isaac and Allison, and Isaac starts to panic because he has claustrophobia from when his father used to lock him in the freezer. He begins to freak out and pound on the door. Allison tries to calm him down, but Isaac transforms and scratches her arm. At that moment, Scott breaks down the door, gets them out, and calms Isaac down. Isaac apologizes for what he did to Allison, but Scott understands that he didn't mean it and tells him that the twins don't just want to upset him, they want to hurt him. Stiles talks to Lydia, explaining his theory about human sacrifices. He tells her that there's a religion that sacrifices an infant every day. Lydia asks why he's telling her this, and he responds that it's because Scott is focused on the twins. Lydia starts to think because she used to have a crush on one of them. Stiles asks if she knows Ethan and Aiden, but Lydia tells him that it's not his job and he should let his dad handle it. Scott and Isaac start to retaliate against the twins. Allison unlocks Isaac's motorcycle, which he rides into the school. Scott takes the lock and enters the classroom where the twins are. He shows them the lock, causing Aiden to freak out and go to check on his motorcycle. He finds Isaac riding it and tells him to get off. Isaac does and walks away. The teacher comes out and sees Aiden on the motorcycle inside the school. Meanwhile, Derek is resisting death. Deucalion tells him that the stronger the individuals, the stronger the pack becomes. He explains that after losing his sight, one of his pack members tried to take his place, so he had to kill him. This made him realize that every time he kills a member of his pack, their strength is added to his. Deucalion wants Derek to give himself a chance to know him like his sister did and points out that he knows nothing about him. Suddenly, the Alpha with Deucalion gets scared, and Deucalion declares that he's the demon wolf. Kali then removes the rod from Derek, and they leave. At the same time, Lydia is sitting and sketching. Danny tells her she's really good at drawing and should join the art class instead of music class. Lydia looks around and realizes she's in the music room without remembering how she got there. She sees a phone recording on the piano, plays the recording, and hears music at first, then strange and frightening sounds. Stiles is sitting with Dr. Deaton, explaining all his suspicions. Dr. Deaton tells him that some time ago, they found someone who died 2,000 years ago in the same manner as the recent murders. He explains that someone is trying to imitate the rituals of an ancient religion and that the person doing this was an outcast demonic priest. Stiles' phone rings, and it's Lydia, who tells him that the school's piano player was killed. Stiles asks if he was killed or just disappeared, and Lydia confirms he was killed because there's blood on the piano. Dr. Deaton asks Lydia to send him the recording. Stiles finds a link between the murders. The dog owner's friend Boyd was in the military class, and the piano player was also in the military class. Lydia points out that there's another person in the military class, the chemistry teacher. At that moment, the chemistry teacher is in his office working and hears the same sound from the recording. Isaac is with Scott, discussing how annoyed the twins were. Suddenly, they see the twins ahead of them, who merge to form the giant Alpha. Scott and Isaac start running, but the giant Alpha catches up and grabs them both. Deucalion enters, and the twins separate. Deucalion scratches the twins with a small blade from his cane and leaves. Scott and Isaac go to the teacher's office but don't find him. They see papers on his desk, each with a letter written in red. When they arrange them, they spell out Darek, the demonic druid Stiles mentioned. Isaac goes back to Derek's place to sleep but finds Derek has packed his bag and tells him he needs to leave immediately. Isaac thinks Derek is joking, but Derek is serious. Isaac tries to find out why Derek wants him to leave, and Derek coldly tells him that his sister is with him and he doesn't need anyone else, eventually pushing Isaac out. Scott is in his room when there's a knock on the door. Thinking it's his mom, he opens it to find Isaac, who asks if he can stay with him after being kicked out by Derek. In the final scene, we see the chemistry teacher tied up in the woods, begging someone to let him go. He says he did everything they asked and still needs to complete something, but the person doesn't listen and kills him in the same manner as the previous victims.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.
The episode starts with the soccer team heading to a game, and Isaac tells Boyd to stop thinking about what happened and focus on the game. We see Danny sitting with one of the twins, telling him to calm down because he keeps checking his phone. The twin responds that he's waiting for a message. Then he looks over at Scott, who is dreaming that he's transforming and hears people screaming. Stiles wakes him up and starts asking him to say words, and Scott tells him their meanings. Stiles then asks, "What does dark mean?" Scott looks at him but doesn't respond. Stiles says, "We have 5 hours on the bus, why not talk about this?" Referring to the human sacrifices. Scott looks tired, so Stiles asks to see the wound and finds it in bad shape. Stiles asks why it's not healing, and Scott explains that it's because it's an alpha wound, so it takes time. Stiles then asks why Isaac and Boyd aren't like him, and Scott says he can't believe Derek is dead. We see Allison and Lydia driving behind the bus, and Allison asks Lydia if she's too close to them. Lydia asks if she's following the bus or Scott. Allison says she won't let Scott out of her sight again after what happened, and then mentions that he came to her house first. Lydia asks why he came, and Allison remembers what happened. Scott brought her one of her arrows, saying he found it where Isaac, Boyd, and Kara entered the school. Allison tries to deny it's hers, but Scott says no one else has those types of arrows. She suggests it might be her dad's, but Scott reminds her that they agreed to stay away from this stuff. Allison asks if he came to tell her to stay away. Scott says he wants her to understand that Boyd and Kara are dangerous and that things are different now. He leaves, but runs into Deucalion in the elevator. Scott rushes to Derek to tell him he found the Alpha's location, but Derek says he knows they are in Allison's family building. Boyd says he and Kara followed the twins and found their location. Scott suggests they want to show them their place, but Peter says maybe it doesn't matter to them. Scott sees Derek with a blueprint and asks what it is. Peter says it's a plan, and Scott asks if they're going there. Derek replies, "Tomorrow, and you'll be with us." Stiles sees Scott and tells him the wound is still bleeding, meaning it hasn't started healing. Scott then notices Ethan listening to their conversation, and Stiles asks if Ethan might do something. Scott says, "Not in front of people." Stiles then asks if the two sitting next to him, Boyd and Isaac, will do anything. Scott says, "Probably not here either." We see Derek telling them they are on the floor above Allison, and Scott asks if they're going to kill them before they get killed. He questions why every plan has to involve killing. Peter asks why Scott always has to be so moral. Kara asks why they should listen to a kid, and Derek replies that this kid helped save her. Derek says they will kill Deucalion because he is the head of the snake, and if he dies, the whole snake dies. Lydia tells Allison they are running out of gas. Lydia suggests they can stop at any gas station since they know where the bus is heading. But Allison insists she doesn't want to lose sight of them again, saying she didn't see what happened last time. Lydia tells her she knows who started it, and Allison asks if that's what Aiden told her. The bus gets stuck in traffic, and Boyd starts transforming. Scott gets up to stop him before he does something reckless. Scott recalls when he met Deucalion in the elevator, ready to attack him, but Deucalion told him he must kill someone to become an alpha. Scott responds that he's not like Deucalion and doesn't need to kill anyone. Deucalion counters, saying that, for now, that's true, but eventually, Scott will find himself in a situation where he must kill to save someone else. Scott asks if Deucalion came there just to tell him that. Deucalion replies that he lives there, making Scott feel threatened. Deucalion continues, saying that the neighbors are excellent. Scott asks if he's being threatened, but Deucalion says no. He's here to learn his truth. Scott then remembers Derek fighting Ennis, and both falling to their deaths. We see Kara standing where Derek was killed, with Peter asking her about Derek and Ennis's missing bodies. Scott reaches Boyd and tells him that if he has a plan, he should share it, and Scott will support him, but killing someone in front of all these people isn't an option. Isaac helps Scott hold Boyd back and notices Scott's wound, asking if he's still hurt. Scott downplays it, saying it's nothing serious. Scott asks Boyd to give him time to think of a plan that doesn't involve killing anyone, then goes back to his seat. Stiles tells Scott that Ethan keeps checking his phone, and he's sure Ethan is up to something bad. Stiles asks Danny to find out why Ethan keeps checking his phone, but Danny refuses, saying it's none of his business. Stiles persists by sending Danny messages. Eventually, Danny responds, saying Ethan is waiting for a message about a close relative who is dying. Scott tells Stiles that this means Ennis is still alive. Dr. Deaton is seen meeting Kali, who brings Ennis to him for treatment. They demand he opens the clinic's doors, but he refuses. Kali grabs the neck of the guidance counselor and threatens to kill her. Dr. Deaton, not falling for the threat, tells Kali that he knows she won't harm the counselor. The counselor intervenes, insisting that Dr. Deaton opens the door and treats Ennis, warning that if Ennis dies, they will kill everyone else, including Scott. Deaton agrees and lets them in. Stiles asks Scott about Dr. Deaton, suggesting they contact him for help. Scott says Deaton always has his answering machine on. Stiles says he'll get Lydia and Allison to help with Scott's wound. Scott points out that they are in the city and far away, but Stiles reveals that they've been following the bus all along. Stiles calls Lydia, asking her to put him on speaker. He tells Allison that Scott is still hurt, and Allison suggests a rest stop nearby, telling Stiles to convince the coach to stop there. Lydia questions what they'll do, asking if they'll take Scott to a hospital. Allison says they will if necessary. Stiles approaches the coach, claiming he needs a bathroom break, but the coach refuses. Stiles returns to his seat but overhears the coach telling a teammate, Jared, to look up because he has motion sickness. Stiles gets an idea, sits next to Jared, and encourages him to look down. Jared throws up on the bus, forcing the coach to pull over at the rest stop. Allison takes Scott and wonders why his wound isn't healing, considering he's recovered from worse injuries before. Lydia suggests it's psychological, saying Scott doesn't want to heal. Stiles agrees, saying Scott is refusing to heal because Derek is dead. Allison decides to stitch the wound, believing that Scott needs to feel that someone is helping him heal. Meanwhile, Dr. Deaton begins treating Ennis and instructs them to close the clinic door. Allison prepares to stitch Scott's wound, but Stiles urges her to hurry because the bus will leave soon. Lydia tells Allison she can help delay the bus and takes Stiles with her. Allison tells Scott to keep looking at her as she tries to thread the needle but struggles. She remembers her mother scolding her, saying, "Something so simple and you can't do it?" and asking how she handles tough situations. Allison replies calmly and tells herself to stop crying. She manages to thread the needle and stitches the wound. Scott suddenly stops breathing and recalls Derek falling with Ennis. Allison calls out to Scott, and he wakes up, blaming himself for Derek's death. He asks if she stitched the wound, and she confirms. Allison helps him up and gets him dressed. Scott remembers Isaac walking in on him while he was getting dressed, asking where he was going. Scott tries to avoid answering, but Isaac insists on coming with him. Scott and Allison leave the bus, and Lydia tells them that Stiles is trying to stall the coach. Scott recalls confronting Deucalion with Isaac and asking if he came alone. Deucalion replies that it wasn't Isaac he was talking about, and Derek appears. Scott talks to Derek, explaining that he wanted to resolve the issue without anyone getting hurt. Derek points to Deucalion, indicating he wants to handle him alone. Deucalion then reveals that he wouldn't have made it there without the rest of the Alpha Pack. Scott returns to the bus and finds Isaac beating up Ethan. Scott stops him. Meanwhile, Kara and Peter are at the veterinary clinic, and Kara comments on it being just an animal clinic. Peter explains that half the building is made of mountain ash wood, preventing any supernatural beings from entering. He mentions he's unsure how they will get inside. Kara suggests using the door, and Peter reveals that the entire Alpha Pack is inside. Inside, Deucalion is with Ennis, asking Dr. Deaton about his condition. Deaton says he will recover. Deucalion then kisses Ennis before killing him to take his power. Kara asks Peter who is inside, Derek or Ennis. At that moment, Kali comes out screaming in grief, confirming it wasn't Derek inside. Derek starts the attack, with Isaac and Scott joining to defend them. Unfortunately, the Alpha Pack overpowers Scott, Isaac, Kara, and Boyd. Deucalion offers Derek a deal: kill Boyd, and he will let the rest go. Derek hesitates, unsure of what to do. In the midst of this, another attack comes from above. Allison shoots arrows at the Alphas, and Deucalion orders them to cover their eyes. Allison calls her father, Chris, asking for help, but he refuses, saying they aren't his family. Allison insists they have become like family to her, and she needs to stand by them. She joins the fight, turning the tide again, but the Alphas are still very strong. Ennis, in particular, is too much for Scott and Isaac. Derek intervenes, and Scott claws at Ennis's leg, causing them both to fall. Stiles tells Lydia about his theory on the human sacrifices, mentioning a druid, or Darek, which means dark oak in Gaelic. Lydia notes that some cultures perform human sacrifices before battles. Stiles concludes that they are facing an Alpha Pack and a druid. Allison tells Scott that if Derek is dead, it isn't his fault. Scott thanks her for helping despite his earlier warning to stay away. Finally, we see Jennifer, the teacher, getting into her car when a wounded Derek approaches, seeking her help. After that, an old car appears and a wounded person comes out of it, and this conversation takes place in 77. He enters a hotel room and finds himself injured on his side with wolf claws. He opens the window and sees the full moon. Here, He takes out a gun and shoots himself with fire before transforming. Afterwards, we see the school bus arriving at the same hotel, and the coach tells them that the sports meeting has been postponed until tomorrow, and that they will be staying at this hotel until then, with 2 students sharing one room. Lydia stands and looks at the hotel, feeling something unnatural in the place, and tells Allison that there is something wrong with this hotel. Allison responds that it's just one night and they'll get through it, but Lydia insists that there are many powerful things that could happen in just one night. Scott enters the room with Stiles and tells him that there are 4 suspects who might be the ones killing people, and mentions Harris, the chemistry teacher, as the prime suspect. Scott questions whether Harris would still kill people and make human sacrifices if he weren't dead already, and asks who the other 2 suspects are. Stiles mentions Derek's sister, Kara, who disappeared years ago and returned, and Dr. Deering, who knows everything and is very mysterious. Scott then asks about the last suspect, and Stiles reveals it's Lydia, hinting that Peter used to control her before. We see Jennifer arriving at Derek's house and telling him that they need to go to the hospital, but he refuses to leave. Chris goes to the place where he met the werewolves and sees the traces on the ground, indicating the fights and bloodshed. Meanwhile, Scott enters the bathroom and looks at his eye in a strange way, while Stiles goes to buy something and finds Boyd also shopping but acting as if he's asleep. After he puts money into the vending machine, nothing comes out. Stiles tells Boyd that he will handle it, but Boyd breaks the glass with his hand, takes what he bought, and leaves. Lydia goes down to the hotel reception, holding towels, and tells the old lady running it that the towels smell like cigarettes. She apologizes and Lydia feels scared of her. Lydia sees the number 98 hanging on the wall and asks about it. The old lady tells her it's something her husband insisted on, and informs her that they are number 1 in the state for the number of suicides in the hotel, and the count is still ongoing. Isaac is sitting in a hotel room holding the remote control, trying to change the channels, but there's no signal. Chris calls Allison and tells her he can come pick her up, but she says they are staying in a not-so-nice hotel for the night and will go to the match in the morning. He asks her the name of the hotel, feeling like he knows it, and tells her to call him immediately if anything happens. Chris continues his inspection of the place and sees the traces of Allison's arrows on the wall, realizing she was there. Meanwhile, Derek is with the teacher, examining his wound, and she tells him that aside from the black goo he's bleeding, the wound is very bad. Lydia leaves the room and tells Allison about what she saw downstairs and the number of suicides, implying that they have an unusually high rate of suicides every year. Suddenly, Lydia hears voices from the room next to theirs, where a man and a woman are talking to each other, agreeing to commit suicide by setting themselves on fire. Lydia is scared and tells Allison that 2 people next to their room have committed suicide. She rushes to the room, but finds it empty with some repairs being done. She tells Allison that it was a young couple, but Allison believes her. Boyd goes to get ice and hears a voice accusing him of abandoning someone, asking why he left them. He looks in the ice and sees the face of the girl who was with him, now dead. Lydia tells Allison that she's leaving because they're renovating the place to remove bloodstains, but Allison insists they investigate what's happening there first. Isaac wakes up to the sound of movement and thinks of Boyd but can't find him. He hears his father asking for the room number, but Isaac gives him the wrong one. His father scolds him and tells him to go into the deep freeze as punishment, and Isaac feels like he's actually inside it. Lydia and Allison go to the hotel reception and find out that the number of suicides has now risen to 2. Lydia realizes that means there have been 3 suicide cases happening or about to happen. Scott gets a call from his mom, who tried to stop him from entering but couldn't. Deucalion calls him and tells him to look out the window, where Scott sees Peter holding his mom and then killing her. At that moment, Stiles enters the room and asks Scott what's wrong, but Scott wakes up and finds no one there. Lydia sends a message to Stiles saying she wants to meet him alone without Scott. At the same time, Ethan feels something unnatural in his body and sees what looks like a human face in his abdomen trying to get out, so he runs out of the room. Stiles meets Lydia and Allison and they each share the strange things they've witnessed. Lydia tells them she warned them about something being wrong with the hotel. She grabs her things to leave, but Stiles realizes that the 3 additional numbers referred to Scott, Boyd, and Isaac, and convinces Lydia to stay. However, when they enter the room, they find the door locked and hear a chainsaw running inside. They find Boyd listening to voices on the radio, and every time he turns it off, it turns back on, with someone talking about his dead girlfriend. Boyd breaks the radio, then goes to the reception area and finds a large safe. Allison goes to look for Scott, while Stiles apologizes to Lydia, saying he didn't mean to imply she was trying to kill people. Lydia hears a baby crying and a mother shouting at it to be quiet, then turning on the water and drowning it. Boyd holds the safe he took from the office and leans over the bathtub full of water, taking the safe with him and drowning. Lydia tells Stiles that someone is drowning right now. They rush to Boyd and Isaac's room and find Boyd indeed drowning, trying to save him, but the safe is too heavy. Stiles suggests using heat to get him out and touches the fireplace, burning himself, but suggests they use heat in the water. Lydia remembers the cheerleaders' flares on the bus and Stiles rushes to get them. Lydia looks under the bed and finds Isaac. Stiles returns with the flares and lights them, putting them in the water, and Boyd is able to surface. He then lights another one to help Isaac. They go to look for Scott and find him standing in the street, pouring gasoline on himself and holding a heat flare in his hand. If they get close, it will ignite. Scott stops them and says there's no hope, and he's the cause of everything that's happening. He says they were nothing before he was bitten and nobody noticed them. However, Stiles insists they've always been together, and if they're going to die, they should do it together. He stands with Scott in the gasoline and takes the lit flare from him, but throws it away. Unfortunately, the wind blows it back onto the gasoline, but Lydia pushes them away in time. The next day, the coach finds Scott, Stiles, Lydia, and Allison asleep on the bus and tells them the match has been cancelled. Ethan approaches Scott and thanks him, then tells him that Derek is still alive but he killed one of them, and now they have to choose whether to join them and kill the rest of their team, or else Kate will come after them and kill them. Lydia takes the whistle from the coach and blows it, finding a substance on her hand. They realize that every time the coach blows the whistle, the substance affects Boyd, Scott, Isaac, and Ethan. Chris visits Gerard, who tells him that his blind uncle died in the hotel in 1977, and during the autopsy, they found a wolf bite on his body. Chris wants to know who the alpha was that bit him, and Gerard reveals it was Deucalion. We're seeing a large number of casualties coming into the hospital from multiple incidents, and Scott takes his mom out to dinner because, of course, she won't be able to return due to these incidents. She tells him that the emergency doctor isn't available, and they don't know how to reach him. They've called another doctor, but she hasn't arrived yet. Then, one of the injured patients approaches her and asks for pain relief because she's in a lot of pain. However, Melissa refuses to give her pain relief and tells her she has to wait for the doctor. Scott sits next to her, holding her hand, trying to alleviate her pain. Suddenly, Ethan enters with Danny, asking for help. Dr. Hilliard calls them, saying she's caught up in an incident and will be delayed. Scott grabs Ethan, asking what he did to Danny. Ethan denies doing anything and says Danny suddenly felt like he was choking. Melissa checks on him and finds that his throat has shifted, causing breathing difficulties. Scott tells her they might be able to help until the doctor arrives. Meanwhile, the doctor encounters butterflies attacking her, and something terrifying appears in the mirror. Melissa manages to save Danny, and Scott leaves after making sure Danny is okay, followed by Ethan, who claims he had nothing to do with what happened. Scott notices a car moving unnaturally and hitting another parked car. Officer Noah arrives to investigate and learns that both doctors have been kidnapped. He asks Scott and Stiles to wait while he takes Melissa's statement. Scott tells Stiles that the doctor's abduction is related to human sacrifices. Stiles mentions that Dr. Deaton said this about Derek's need for healers. Scott is surprised by what happened to Danny since he's not involved. Stiles notices his dad getting a call and tells Scott to listen to the caller. Scott tells him they found a body. Doyle and Aiden go to see the body, with Chris watching over the situation. An alarm goes off at Derek's, revealing the alpha symbol on his window. His sister asks what it means, and Derek explains they're coming today. Scott goes to school and attends chemistry class with Stiles, but they find out that Jennifer, the school's teacher, is there instead, saying she'll teach in Mr. Harris's place until they find him. Then she realizes what she said and tries to play it off. Stiles tells Scott that the hospital has 20 doctors, making it difficult to know who will be kidnapped. Dr. Deaton calls Scott, saying he's going to be kidnapped and needs Scott to find him. He hangs up and finds the doctor surrounded by butterflies. Isaac and Boyd go to Derek's, but Isaac says they're there to help, and Boyd has a plan. Boyd explains that when Gerard kept him and Erica captive, they were connected by high-frequency electrical wires. He takes out electrical wires from his bag, saying he'll lure them but in a larger area. Scott goes to the clinic and finds Officer Noah, who tells him Stiles informed him before leaving. Boyd is pouring water on the ground, saying it will conduct electricity, so anyone trying to enter will get electrocuted, especially since they're not wearing shoes. The officer tells Scott they'll do what they can and need to go back to school. Scott enters with Stiles, trying to convince him to tell his dad the truth. As they're leaving, they encounter the school counselor, who tells the officer they need to find her brother. Scott and Stiles are surprised to learn she's his sister. She goes to talk to them, saying she's there to help them find him and that they need someone who can communicate with supernatural entities, leading Stiles to mention Lydia. Meanwhile, Lydia is with Ethan at school when they hear the fire alarm. Ethan goes out, and Lydia grabs her bag to follow but finds Kara standing in front of her. The doctor's body arrives at the hospital, and Melissa asks Officer Noah how she died. She tells him she needs him to see the bodies. She has to help her. Kara tells Lydia that Derek says not to meet Ethan again, but Lydia says she used to be accompanied by a cloud before and won't be afraid of a werewolf. Kara holds Lydia's hand tightly, and Stiles arrives, telling her to let go and sending Scott a message that he found Lydia. Scott hears a noise and follows it, while Stiles stays with Lydia and Kara, bringing out a game and asking Lydia to try it to see if she can locate Dr. Deaton. Scott reaches the source of the noise and finds Deucalion, who tells him they can help him find Deaton. The game doesn't work with Lydia, so Stiles grabs Deaton's clinic keys and tells Lydia to close her eyes and hold his hand to see if she senses anything, but Lydia still doesn't feel anything. Deucalion tells Scott that he'll tell him where Deaton is if he can grab his cane from him, testing Scott's abilities. Scott tries to take the cane, but Deucalion is very skilled and manages to injure him with it. He tells Scott that he's not the one killing innocents and worshipping ancient gods, but he's part of a group that wants to kill Derek and he has to choose between Derek and Deaton. Scott asks where Deaton is, and Deucalion says he'll leave him a clue and walks away with Scott following him. Meanwhile, Stiles tries to get information from Lydia, but she tells Kara that Stiles isn't as smart as he thinks. However, Lydia says she's smart but not a psychic, and if they need someone to help them, they should go to Danny. Stiles asks why Danny, and Scott enters, saying it's because Danny was the target yesterday, so he must know something. We see Melissa showing the officer the bodies, saying both were strangled without any marks on their necks. She shows him a wound on their hands, indicating they were tied up with their hands to the ceiling, meaning Deaton was also tied up. Scott leaves with Stiles to go to Danny in the hospital, but Scott tells Stiles to go alone because he found something and received a message from Allison asking him to meet her. We see Boyd after flooding the area with water and electricity, hoping his plan will succeed. Scott goes to Allison and enters his dad's office, where she shows him a map on his desk. They see that he's been tracking everything since they were alphas at the bank, but they find an area that's not covered, meaning there are still bodies undiscovered. Chris comes out from underneath, but Scott manages to hide and leaves without being seen. Stiles goes to Danny's room, looks through his stuff, and finds a file, then leaves. Scott informs them that Danny was working with the chemistry teacher Harris, who disappeared on a project about Earth currents. Isaac asks Derek why the light went out, and Derek says it means someone cut the power. Callie arrives, threatening Jennifer, and at the same time, Scott explains to Stiles the file he found at Danny's and discovers that Deaton is in the bank vault. Kara tells them Boyd sent a message saying his plan failed, so Scott tells them to help Derek while he goes to Deaton. Scott reaches the vault and indeed finds Dr. Deaton inside, but he's surrounded by a circle of mountain ash preventing him from entering. Callie starts beating Derek, and Scott tries to break the circle. We see Callie still overpowering Derek, while Scott tries to break through the circle with all his strength but unfortunately fails. Then the officer arrives and sets the rope on fire, causing Dr. Deaton to fall. Stiles, Kara, and Lydia arrive and turn on the electricity, electrocuting the area. Callie is still stronger than Derek, and after the electricity stops, Boyd tackles Callie, saving Derek. Callie tells Boyd if Lydia hadn't joined her until the moon rose, she would have killed all of his pack members. Boyd tells her not to be upset and reminds her that he wanted to know how the eclipse would affect them, recalling Erica asking Callie about the lunar eclipse. Chris goes to Gerard and tells him he needs to tell the whole truth, then leaves. But Allison arrives later and tells her that Gerard says she's late. Scott asks the officer how he found their location, and he says he found a symbol resembling the bank symbol in the clinic and asks for an ambulance. Finally, Deaton tells Scott that his eyes were glowing red, meaning he could be an alpha without killing anyone. He tells him that since he knew he was bitten, he believed in him, and now he understands that Deucalion isn't looking for Derek but for him.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.
The episode begins with a young Derek running away from Chris and his family, who are chasing him, wanting to hunt him down. He encounters a shapeshifter who asks him if he's from the Hale family, but before he answers, an arrow from a hunter kills the shapeshifter. Before a second arrow hits Derek, Peter arrives, catches the arrow, and they both flee. Kara continues the story for Styles, explaining that they hide for 2 full days to avoid being found. Kara asks Styles why he's so interested in Derek's story, and he replies that many things have happened recently, and he needs Derek's help before others get hurt. However, Kara tells him she doesn't believe Derek can change what's happening. Styles insists that Derek can help, especially since the Alpha Pack is hunting him down, implying that the solution is in Derek's hands. Kara counters that while Derek might have been able to help in the past, he's changed too much now. Peter then interjects, saying that it was love that changed Derek. Styles, surprised, asks if Peter is implying that a love story is what caused Derek's significant transformation. We then see Allison and Scott meeting with Gerard. Scott shakes Gerard's hand, taking on the pain Gerard is feeling. Meanwhile, a girl named Paige tries to play her musical instrument but is disturbed by the sound of a ball game outside. She goes outside to ask the boys to stop playing, only to find Derek playing the game. Paige asks him to go play in the gym, but Derek refuses. Paige goes back inside to continue playing, and Derek follows her to apologize. Gerard asks Allison if they've found another doctor dead, to which she confirms that they've found a third body after Scott saved Deaton. Gerard then tries to plant doubt in Scott's mind about Dr. Deaton, suggesting that he might be the evil druid, Daruk, orchestrating everything and knowing Scott would find him. Scott denies this, saying Deaton would never do such a thing, and asks Gerard for a way to defeat Deucalion. Gerard responds that he can't and admits that even he couldn't defeat him. Allison realizes that Gerard is dodging their questions and tells Scott that they should leave, as it's clear Gerard doesn't know anything useful. However, Gerard says he might be able to help them, revealing that Deucalion isn't always blind and begins telling his story. Meanwhile, Styles sits with Kara and Peter, listening to Derek's story with Paige. Peter explains that Derek used to meet Paige at a chemical factory. Styles asks how Peter knows all these details, and Peter responds that he was Derek's best friend. However, Peter is lying, as he was actually spying on Derek. Peter recounts seeing Derek arrive at the factory with Paige, where Derek tells her that he smells blood, prompting them to leave quickly. After they leave, Deucalion, Kali, and Ennis arrive with their packs. Ennis reveals that the Argent family killed one of his pack members and hung him there, and now he seeks revenge. Kali dismisses Ennis's concern, asking why she should care about the death of one of his pack members. Another member of her pack chimes in, explaining that hunters don't differentiate between different groups, implying that all werewolves are targets. Deucalion suggests there must be a reason for the killing. Marco, a member of Deucalion's pack, explains that the werewolf had killed a hunter, which is why they killed him, but Ennis insists it was an accident. Gerard continues his story, explaining that, at the time, each werewolf had their own pack before they decided to kill them and form the Alpha Pack. He mentions a female leader who could transform into a wolf, and they always sought her advice on everything. Dahlia, Derek's mother, arrives and tells them that revenge won't benefit anyone, and Deucalion agrees. However, Ennis refuses to listen, scratching a spiral into the ground, symbolizing his intent for revenge. Ennis heads to the hospital to retrieve the body, but Sheriff Noah arrives and tells him that an investigation needs to happen and that he can't take the body because he's not a relative. Kara asks Peter how this is connected to what happened to Derek, and Peter explains that everything is intertwined. He tells them that Derek was always focused on one thing, revealing his true self to Paige. Peter suggests that Derek wanted to turn Paige into a werewolf to ensure they stayed together forever. Of course, Peter twists the truth, claiming it was Derek's idea and that he tried to stop him. In reality, Peter encouraged Derek by exploiting his fear that Paige would leave him if she discovered he was a shapeshifter. Peter mentions that Derek's mother, Dahlia, would never agree to turn Paige, but there were other werewolves in the area who could do it. Meanwhile, Chris and Gerard arrive at a location marked with a druid sigil and find blood from human sacrifices. Chris explains that they are at the Nematon, a sacred place where druids gather. Allison asks how her father knew so much about druids, and Gerard explains that it's because he believed in knowing your enemy. Gerard continues, recounting how ancient wolves had a connection with the druids, whom they called emissaries, who offered them advice. Gerard shares an ancient story about a man named Lycaon who defied the Greek gods and served Zeus human flesh at a feast. In retaliation, Zeus cursed Lycaon and his family, transforming them into wolves. Gerard's question is how Lycaon found the druids and convinced them to turn him back into a human. Scott asks why specifically the druids, and Gerard explains that the druids discovered a way to change wolves back into humans and vice versa. Since then, werewolves have maintained a relationship with the druids. Kara explains to Styles that druids are constantly needed for guidance, but they remain a secret, with only the alphas knowing their true identities. She adds that neither she nor Derek knew anything about Deaton, and Peter adds, nor about Morel, his sister. Styles asks if Morel is also an emissary, to which Peter confirms, saying she serves the Alpha Pack. Styles is shocked, recalling how he used to confide in Morel, his guidance counselor, sharing personal details. Kara explains that it's their job not to reveal much, and Styles agrees. Meanwhile, Deedon suggests that Talia and Deucalion should make peace with Gerard. Deedon warns them about Gerard, and Talia advises against meeting him alone, calling him a psychopath. Deucalion responds, saying he's an alpha and wouldn't go alone. At school, Paige is alone when she hears a noise, assuming it's Derek, and goes looking for him, but it turns out to be Ennis. Kara asks Peter why Ennis was chosen, and Peter explains that Ennis needed a new pack member after losing one and that Paige was young and strong. Derek sits in the gym, hearing Paige's voice, but can't stay still and rushes out to find her. Unfortunately, he's too late as Ennis has already bitten her. Throughout all of this, Peter has been watching from afar, not intervening. Gerard continues his story, explaining that he wasn't surprised when Deedon approached him to arrange a meeting with Deucalion. Gerard knew it was a trap. Scott asks why Gerard was so suspicious, and Gerard replies that he understands the nature of werewolves. At the chemical plant, Gerard sets a trap, releasing gas and killing his own men. Deucalion questions why Gerard would kill his own team, and Gerard replies, they wanted peace. Peter concludes the story, revealing that while Paige was meant to transform, not everyone is cut out for it. She fought hard against the change. We then see Deucalion attempting to flee from Gerard, who chases him, intending to kill him. Deucalion, claiming to have had a vision of peace, is blinded when Gerard plunges 2 arrows into his eyes, saying, unfortunately, your vision is weak. Derek, holding Paige's hand, absorbs her pain, apologizing to her. In a heartbreaking moment, Paige reveals she always knew Derek's secret and asks him to kill her to end her suffering, which he does. Peter explains that taking an innocent life darkens a werewolf's soul, turning their eyes blue. Deedon removes the bandages from Deucalion's eyes, telling him that while they will return to their normal appearance, he will never see again. Deucalion asks to be left alone, and Talia and Deedon leave. However, Marco, a member of Deucalion's pack, stays behind, attacking Deucalion. Deucalion, despite being blind, manages to kill Marco. Scott asks Gerard if Deucalion sees like wolves do, not like humans. Gerard reiterates that Deucalion isn't always blind. As Scott and Allison prepare to leave, Gerard asks Scott to take away some of his pain again. After doing so, Scott warns Gerard that if his story causes anyone harm, Scott will return, but next time, he'll take something more than just his pain. Styles expresses his disbelief in Peter's story, noting that he's learned every story is told from the teller's perspective. Kara asks if Styles plans to ask Derek about the girl he loved and who died. In the final scene, Talia approaches Derek at the spot where he used to meet Paige. Derek tells his mother that he did something terrible, and she assures him she knows everything. As Derek opens his eyes, they have turned blue. Officer Graham is seen entering the school at night and suddenly spots Danny and his friends behind her. She asks what they're doing there, and Danny explains that they were rehearsing for the concert scheduled for the next day. Danny then asks if something happened, and she tells him that there was an emergency call and instructs them to leave the school immediately. She also tells them to make sure anyone else still in the school leaves as well. Officer Graham tries to call for backup, but her radio isn't working. She then notices someone being dragged by their legs and follows, only to discover that the person she thought she saw dead is actually herself. Suddenly, a strange creature attacks and kills her from behind. Scott and Styles arrive at the school to meet Lydia and Allison. Lydia tells them that, like every other time, she found herself at the school when she had intended to go somewhere else. Styles asks her if she found a body, and Lydia responds that she called them so they could find it. Scott then discovers Officer Graham's body, hanging on the school fence. The next day, Styles sees his father investigating the crime scene and reassures him that they will find the killer. Later, Chris talks to Allison and offers to take her to the memorial concert for the students who died that night. However, Allison tells him that she's not in the mood. As soon as Chris leaves, Allison gears up and takes her weapons from her closet. She senses someone on her balcony and finds Isaac spying on her. She asks if Scott sent him to watch her, and Isaac explains that he is worried about her, though it's clear she can take care of herself. Meanwhile, Jennifer is teaching a class, and Scott tells Styles that he might be able to get Ethan to talk if he knows who the Dark is, as the Dark could be an emissary to the Alpha Pack. Styles points out a problem: Aiden, Ethan's brother, won't let them get to him easily. At that moment, Aiden is standing with Ethan, reminding him that they're not students at the school but are there for a specific mission. He also warns Ethan to stay away from Danny, but Ethan insists that Danny poses no threat. Aiden is firm and tells him that if he doesn't stay away, he will kill him. Stiles observes that ever since Ethan and Aiden returned to school, they've always been together, and wonders how they can separate them. They look over at Lydia for help. Lydia agrees to help and approaches Aiden to distract him from Ethan, allowing them to talk to him. She asks Aiden why he's been staring at her, and he tells her it's the first time they've spoken since Boyd's death. Lydia responds that she hasn't spoken to him since he killed Boyd, but Aiden clarifies that it was Kali who killed him, and reminds her that Derek killed Ennis first. Lydia retorts that if that's the case, then it's Derek's turn to kill someone. Aiden brings up how Derek almost killed her and Boyd, and Lydia asks how he knows this. Just then, they see someone carving a spiral into the door, and Aiden says, "Derek." Meanwhile, Ethan stands with Scott and Stiles, asking what they want from him. Scott tells him that they're talking to him because they know that what happened was not entirely his fault. Ethan explains that when he and Aiden first met Deucalion, they were not alphas, they were omegas. He shares that they owe Deucalion a lot, especially Aiden. Ethan steps out of the room, calling out to Derek and telling him that he's ready to fight. However, it turns out that it's Cora, Derek's sister, who is there instead. Ethan explains that omegas are the lowest members of any group, often the weakest and least respected. The group they belonged to before was full of criminals and killers. Stiles asks why they didn't shift into wolves and defend themselves, to which Ethan replies that they were too young and didn't know how. But Deucalion taught them, and eventually, they were able to kill all their enemies. Scott asks what happened to the emissaries, and Ethan reveals that all of them were killed, except for Deucalion's emissary, Morel. Suddenly, Ethan groans in pain, and Scott asks if he's okay, but Ethan says it's not him, it's his brother. Aiden is injured by Cora, who throws him against the wall and continues to hit him. Before Aiden can kill her, Scott, Stiles, and Ethan arrive and restrain him. Ethan explains that Kali gave them until the next full moon to make a choice, and they walk away. Later, Isaac is with Allison at her house, and he asks her how she could believe that her father is the Darek, responsible for killing people. Allison admits she's not sure, but she has evidence, and she shows Isaac a map. Isaac steps back and tells her to look at the bigger picture. When she does, she sees a pentagram and realizes that it has the names of 5 sacrifices. Cora, badly injured, is told by Stiles that what she did was suicidal. She responds that she tried for Boyd, but all they do is find dead bodies. Scott tells her that he's doing the best he can, but Cora retorts that they always arrive too late. Stiles follows her to ensure she's okay. At the school, Derek meets Jennifer and asks her to come with him, but the bell rings, and Jennifer tells him she still has 3 more classes, plus the concert she organized for the evening. Scott visits Morel and asks her about something he wants to know. At the same time, Allison calls Stiles, telling him what she's discovered and that he needs to tell his father everything. Cora asks what Stiles is going to do, and he replies that he's going to tell his father and asks for her help. Morel asks Scott why he's wasting time with her when people are dying, but Scott accuses her of being the one killing them. Morel denies this, saying she's the one standing between Deucalion and his killing spree. She tells Scott that Deucalion wants a real alpha and believes Scott is that alpha. Scott protests, saying that to become an alpha, he would have to kill someone, which would change him and make him not a true alpha. Morel explains that this is the problem: when a madman wants something and can't get it, he destroys it. She warns that if Scott doesn't join Deucalion, Deucalion will destroy him. She also tells Scott that while he may think he's 1 step ahead, Deucalion is 10 steps ahead. Meanwhile, Mr. Westover is in class, writing on the board, when all the words suddenly disappear, and he sees the symbol of the 5 sacrifices. The chalk falls from his hand, landing near Lydia's feet, and she enters to find herself writing the number 2. Then screams. Jennifer arrives and tells Lydia they need to inform the students about the teacher's disappearance, but Lydia insists that she's certain he's missing. Stiles is trying to explain the situation to his father. Lydia sends a message to Allison about the missing teacher, and Allison declares that they need to stop her father. They examine the map to find the locations of the electrical currents beneath the school to locate the teacher. Stiles explains to his father that Scott and Derek are werewolves, Kate and Chris are hunters, and Dr. Deaton is a druid. Sheriff Noah, Stiles' father, asks who the Dark is, and Stiles admits they don't know yet. Of course, Noah doesn't believe any of it, but Stiles insists that he has proof and asks Cora to transform so his father can see for himself. Allison and Isaac head to the location where they suspect the teacher is being held. Isaac suggests they should have called Scott for backup, but Allison tells him to stay with her and not be afraid. Isaac then comments that if her father tries to kill him, he'll defend himself. Allison responds that if her father wants him dead, no one will be able to stop him. Suddenly, Isaac catches the scent of blood, and they find the teacher with the Dark. Chris arrives and starts shooting, but he can't kill the Dark. They call Stiles and inform him that the Dark is targeting teachers. Chris later accuses Allison of interfering, which allowed the Dark to escape, but Isaac suggests they should put off dealing with their personal issues until after they save the teachers who are in danger. Stiles is at the hospital with his father, explaining that Scott heals without any help, but his father tells him that just because strange things happen in this town doesn't make them real. For the first time, Stiles stands up to his father, telling him that if his mom were alive, she would believe him. Scott arrives at the concert and finds Lydia, asking her why she's there when she's still visibly shaken. Lydia replies that she's the one who always finds the bodies, so maybe if she's there, they can stop the next death before it happens. Meanwhile, Derek is at the hospital with his sister. Sheriff Noah decides to investigate Stiles' claims and heads to the hospital, asking Melissa for old files from 10 years ago. She offers to help him. The concert begins, and Lydia receives a message from Aiden, asking to meet her quickly because he has something important to tell her. Melissa finds the old files and shows them to Sheriff Noah, confirming that, 10 years ago, there was a body with the same characteristics described by Stiles, and they had assumed it was an animal attack. Melissa also mentions that something else strange happened that day. Aiden searches for his phone and tells Ethan that he can't find it. Melissa recalls how, on the day the girl's body was found, hundreds of birds threw themselves against windows, dying in the process. Sheriff Noah comments that they were sacrificing themselves. Lydia heads to the music room but hears the eerie music she associates with danger. Suddenly, Jennifer appears and attacks her. Scott and Stiles search for Lydia but can't find her. Meanwhile, the concert music transitions to an Arabic tune. Lydia wakes up tied to a chair and asks Jennifer why she's doing this. Jennifer responds by saying she's baffled that people refer to those being killed as sacrifices when they don't even understand the meaning of the word. She explains that the true meaning of sacrifice is a human offering to get closer to a god. Jennifer tells Lydia that she isn't a sacrifice but someone who knows too much. As Jennifer prepares to kill Lydia, Lydia lets out a scream that is heard by both Scott and Derek at the hospital. Jennifer tells Lydia that she doesn't even know the truth about herself, revealing that she is a banshee, a wailing woman who predicts death with her screams. Jennifer likens Lydia to herself, saying that on the outside, she looks like a rose, but inside, she's a snake. She ties Lydia to a chair and grabs a knife, ready to kill her. As the band continues to play the eerie music associated with the Dark's killings, the piano player suddenly dies, and chaos ensues. Sheriff Noah arrives and threatens Jennifer with a gun, but she throws a knife at him. Scott enters, fully transformed, to protect Noah and Lydia, but he is no match for Jennifer. Stiles arrives, but Jennifer locks the door, preventing him from getting in. Noah recalls a severely disfigured girl from years ago and asks Jennifer if she was that girl. Jennifer attacks him, kidnaps him, and escapes.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.